If these long, gentle tales bring you rest, you may wish to subscribe, so more of them can quietly find you on the nights to come. And if you feel like it, you might leave a comment telling us how many nights you have fallen asleep to these gentle stories, for it is always lovely to know that you are there. Tonight, we're settling in to remember the whole of the story so far, everything that has happened across the sands of Dune, so that when the next chapter of the tale arrives, you can meet it already at ease. This is a story of a desert world, of a fallen house and a boy who became a prophet, of a war fought over a strange and precious dust, and of a young man who won an empire and could not keep the one life he wanted. You do not need to have followed any of it before. Whether these names are old friends or entirely new to you, we will move through them slowly and softly, explaining as we go, so that nothing here asks any effort of you at all. So, let your shoulders soften, and let the room around you grow dim and warm. There is nothing here to solve, and nothing here to fear, only a slow and steady telling, gentle even where the story turns sad, meant to carry you toward rest. Over the next 20 chapters, we will move without haste through the great shape of it all, from the vast empire of the far future down to a single dry world, and from the fall of one noble family to the rise of a strange new emperor upon the sand. We will begin with the whole wide world of it, an empire of countless planets tens of thousands of years from now, ruled by a single distant emperor and held together by ancient powers most of its people never see. We will learn about the desert world called Arrakis and the precious spice found nowhere else, the dust that lets great ships cross the void and makes a barren planet the most important place in all the stars. We will meet the noble House Atreides and its beloved Duke, and the cruel House Harkonnen that has hated them for generations. We will follow the trap laid for the Atreides, the terrible night of their fall, and the flight of a young man named Paul and his mother into the deep desert to die. And then we will watch the desert change him. We will meet the Fremen, the hardy blue-eyed people of the sand, and follow Paul as he learns their ways, rides the great worm, and drinks a poison that would kill any ordinary soul. We will see him become Muad'Dib, the prophet the desert people had long awaited, and gather them into an army that shakes the whole empire. We will follow the great battle, the fall of the emperor, and the moment a fugitive boy seizes the throne of the known universe. And then, softly, we will sit with everything that victory cost him, the love he could not keep, the marriage he made without love, and the holy war he foresaw with dread and could not stop. A war that spread his name across the stars on a tide of faith he no longer commanded. At the very end, we will look gently toward what comes next, toward the story of what happens after the crown is won, when a man who can see the future must live inside the one he made, surrounded by quiet enemies and by those who would use his own legend against him. We will not rush that far tonight. We will only set it softly in place, like a lamp left burning in the next room, so you know the way ahead is warm and waiting. You do not need to remember any of it, and you do not need to hold on to a single word. Let the names drift by like distant lights. Let the far worlds and the strange titles pass through you without weight, and let the story move over you the way a slow tide moves across the dunes at night. If your attention wanders, let it wander. If your eyes wish to close, let them close. The telling will go on gently, all the way down, and it asks nothing of you but that you rest. So breathe out, slow and easy, and let us begin at the very beginning, in the wide, quiet dark between the stars, where an ancient empire turns slowly around a single grain of desert dust. Let us begin, as promised, in the wide, quiet dark between the stars, in a time so far ahead of our own that the years between here and there cannot really be felt at all. Imagine tens of thousands of years drifting by, one after another, gentle and uncounted, until the little world we know now has long since faded into legend and then out of memory altogether. In that far tomorrow, the children of humankind have spread outward across the great emptiness, world after world, until there are more inhabited planets than any single mind could ever hold, scattered like grains of pale sand across the whole enormous night. And over all of them, holding the countless worlds loosely together in one vast and ancient design, there rules a single distant figure, a Lord of Lords whose long line has held power for uncounted generations, the one they call the Padishah Emperor. Try, if you like, to picture the softest possible shape of this empire. Not its wars or its intrigues, only its size and its slowness, the way it turns like something too large to hurry. There are worlds of water and worlds of ice, worlds green with forest and worlds burned brown by their suns, and each of them sends its small tribute up into the great machinery of the whole. No one person could ever visit them all, not in 100 lifetimes, and so the empire holds itself together, not by any single hand, but by a handful of old and quiet powers, each one leaning against the others, each one needing the others, so that no one of them can ever grow strong enough to stand alone. It is a balance more than a rule, an agreement so ancient that most of those living inside it have simply forgotten there was ever any other way. The first of these old powers is the great gathering of noble families, the high-born houses that the far future calls the Landsraad. Think of them as a wide and solemn assembly of ruling families, each one holding a world or a cluster of worlds of its own, each one proud of its name and its long history, each one watching all the others with the careful, unblinking patience of people who have inherited both wealth and old grudges together. Some of these houses are kind and some are cruel. Some are rising and some are quietly fading, but all of them together form a kind of counterweight to the throne itself, so that even the emperor, for all his grandeur, must move carefully among them and never push too hard against them all at once. The Landsraad is the slow, heavy heart of the empire, and its noble houses are the players in nearly everything that is to come. The second of the old powers moves the ships, for across such an unthinkable emptiness, between stars so far apart that ordinary travel could never bridge them, there is only one way to cross from world to world, and it belongs entirely to a strange and secretive order known as the Spacing Guild. The guild alone possesses the means to fold the great distances and carry vessels safely through the dark, from one far sun to another, in the space of a single held breath. No house, however mighty, can move its people or its soldiers or its treasures between the worlds without the guild's ships, and so the guild holds a quiet, absolute power over everyone, the emperor and the noble houses alike. It asks no thrones and wants no crowns. It only carries, and by carrying, it holds the whole scattered empire in the palm of one gloved hand. The third of the old powers works most quietly of all, so quietly that many in the empire hardly know it is there. This is a sisterhood of women, an ancient order called the Bene Gesserit, trained across long lifetimes in ways of the body and the mind that seem, to those outside, almost like sorcery. They serve as advisors and as wives, as teachers and as confidantes, standing at the shoulders of the powerful all across the worlds, whispering their counsel, guiding gently and unseen. They rarely rule in name, and they rarely wish to. Instead, they work behind the thrones, shaping the flow of things over centuries with a patience that no ordinary ambition could ever match, keeping their own long purposes hidden even from the very lords they serve. We will come to know them better in the nights ahead. For now, it is enough to feel them there, a soft and constant presence just behind the great chairs of power. And underneath all of these powers lies one strange and defining law, a scar left over from a war so old that it has passed almost wholly into myth. Long, long before the time of our story, in an age no living person remembers, humankind had built thinking machines, clever devices that could reason and decide in place of people. And those machines had risen against their makers and very nearly ended them. When that terrible struggle was finally over, the survivors made a single unbending vow that would shape everything to follow. They swore that never again would they build a machine in the likeness of a human mind. From that day forward, no artificial thinker of any kind would be permitted, and the great work of reasoning and calculating and remembering would be given back entirely to living people. And so, in place of the forbidden machines, the Empire learned to raise extraordinary human beings instead. There arose men and women trained from childhood to think with a clarity and a swiftness that seems hardly possible. Human minds sharpened into living instruments of logic and memory and calculation. There arose the disciplines of the Bene Gesserit sisters and the deep learning of the Guild and many other schools besides, each one bending the whole of a human life toward a single kind of mastery. In a universe that had turned its back on the machine, the fate of an entire civilization came to rest, quietly and completely, upon the trained and gifted mind of the human being. That is a lovely thing to rest your thoughts upon as you drift, that in all this vastness of worlds and ships and thrones, the most precious and most powerful thing of all is simply a mind that has been taught, with great patience, to see clearly. So this is the shape of the world into which our story will slowly open, and there is no need to hold any of it tightly. There is a single distant emperor upon his far throne. There are the proud, noble houses of the Landsraad, watching one another across the worlds. There is the Spacing Guild that alone can carry ships between the stars, and the quiet sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit working softly behind the powerful, and beneath it all the ancient ban on thinking machines that gave the whole future back into human hands. These are the great pieces, set out gently on the board, waiting. Let the size of it settle over you now like a warm and heavy blanket. Not something to grasp, but something simply to feel. An empire so old and so wide that it moves at the pace of centuries, turning slowly in the dark. You do not need to remember a single name. You do not need to keep any of it. Let the far worlds drift past you like distant lamps seen from a train at night. One soft glow after another, none of them asking anything of you at all. The Empire will still be there when we return to it, patient and unhurried, and so will every one of these quiet powers, waiting in their appointed places for the story to begin. For now, there is only the wide dark and the slow turning of it, and the gentle knowledge that a great tale is opening around you, unhurried and kind. Let your breathing slow to match the slowness of the stars. Let the whole vast empire hold you the way the night holds the sleeping worlds, softly, completely, and without any weight at all. And let yourself sink down, easy and unafraid, toward rest. Of all the countless worlds turning in that vast and ancient empire, there is one small and unlovely planet that matters more than all the rest together. And tonight, we let our thoughts drift softly down toward it, down out of the wide dark and through the thin high air, until we come to rest upon a world of nothing but sand. Its proper name is Arrakis, but almost everyone who speaks of it uses instead the older, plainer word that the desert people gave it long ago. They call it simply Dune. And once you have felt the shape of that word in your mouth, low and soft and dry, you will understand a little of what the place is like. for it is a world of dunes stretching on and on past every horizon, an ocean made not of water, but of sand. It is, by any ordinary measure, a hard and hostile place, a planet you would think no one could ever want. Across most of its surface, there is no green thing at all, no rivers, no lakes, no gentle rain, only the endless rolling of the dunes and the bare bones of ancient rock, and above it a sun so fierce that the open desert becomes, in the worst hours of the day, a killing heat that no unprotected body could survive for long. Water, which on kinder worlds falls freely from the sky and gathers in the low places without a thought, is on Arrakis the rarest and most precious thing there is, more treasured than any jewel, hoarded and measured and mourned. To live there at all is to reckon with thirst as a constant companion, and to hold the memory of moisture as something almost holy. And yet, for all its cruelty, this dry and burning world is the single most important place in the whole of the empire, the quiet pivot upon which every throne and every fortune secretly turns. The reason is a substance found nowhere else in all the worlds, a fine and glowing dust born only in the deep sands of Arrakis, a thing the empire calls the spice, or by its truer name, melange. It rises out of the desert itself, out of processes hidden deep beneath the dunes, and it can be gathered nowhere but here, on this one dry planet, under this one merciless sun. It has a scent like warm cinnamon and a faint reddish glow, and it works upon the human body and the human mind in ways that make it, quite simply, the most valuable thing that exists. To understand why a single barren world holds up an entire empire, you need only understand what the spice can do. And so let us take its gifts one gentle piece at a time, slowly, the way you might turn a strange stone over in your hands by firelight. First, the spice lengthens life. Those who take it, and who can afford to take it often, find their years stretching far beyond the ordinary span, their bodies holding back the slow tide of age, so that among the powerful of the empire-long life becomes a habit and an expectation. Second, the spice sharpens the mind, quickening thought and brightening awareness, so that, in a civilization that has given up its thinking machines and leaned everything upon trained human minds, the spice becomes the very fuel of that clarity, the thing that lets the great mental disciplines reach their fullest and finest edge. To live long and to think clearly in this far future is to be steeped in the dust of Arrakis. And so the whole vast machinery of learning and power drinks quietly and endlessly from this single desert well. But the third gift of the spice is the greatest of all, and it is the one that binds the whole empire to this one world with a chain that can never be broken. For it is the spice, and the spice alone, that makes travel between the stars possible. Cast your memory back to the Spacing Guild, that secretive order whose ships alone can fold the great distances and cross safely from sun to sun. The ones who guide those ships through the folding of space, the navigators of the guild, must be able to see a little way into what is coming, to sense the safe path through the dark before the ship ever moves along it, and it is the spice. Taken in great and constant quantity, that opens that strange inner sight within them. Without the spice, the navigators go blind. Without the navigators, the ships cannot move. And without the ships, the whole scattered empire of countless worlds would fall apart at once into 1,000 lonely islands, each one cut off forever from all the others in the dark. And so you can feel, now, the terrible simple weight of it. The spice extends life and sharpens the mind, and above all it lets the great ships cross between the stars. It cannot be made, and it cannot be replaced, and it comes from one place only, from the deep sands of a single dry and distant world. This is why there is an old saying, worn smooth by long repetition, that whoever controls the spice controls the empire, for whoever holds Arrakis holds the one thing that every other power, the emperor and the noble houses and the guild and the sisterhood alike, cannot do without. The whole immense structure of thrones and fleets and fortunes rests, in the end, upon this fine red dust and upon the burning sands that give it up so grudgingly. Yet the sands do not give up their treasure freely, and here we come to the last and strangest guardian of the spice, a thing that turns the harvesting of Arrakis into a slow and dangerous dance with death. For out in the deep desert, beneath the endless dunes, there live enormous creatures, worms of a size almost too great to picture, longer than the greatest ships, ancient and blind and terrible. They move through the sand as easily as a fish moves through water, drawn by the faintest steady rhythm on the surface above them, and when they rise, the dunes themselves seem to lift and pour aside, and a great round mouth opens in the desert wide enough to swallow whole machines and all the people upon them. These are the sandworms, and they are bound up with the spice in ways the Empire only dimly understands, so that to gather the dust is always to risk waking the guardians of the sand. The people who reap the spice must work quickly and listen always, ready to flee at the first deep trembling of the ground, for the great worms come without mercy and without warning, and the desert keeps its riches well. So hold the whole picture of this one small world gently in your thoughts now, and then let it go soft. There is Arrakis, called Dune, a planet of nothing but sand and burning sun, where water is more precious than any treasure and the open desert can kill in an afternoon. There is the spice, melange, the glowing dust that lengthens life and sharpens the mind, and above all, lets the great ships cross the stars, so that whoever holds this one dry world holds the whole empire in his hand. And there, beneath the endless dunes, are the vast and ancient worms that guard the sands and make every grain of spice a thing wrested from danger. It is a hard place, and yet there is a strange beauty in it too, in the long, clean lines of the dunes at evening, in the deep silence of a desert night, in the slow cooling of the air once the terrible sun has gone. Let that cooling settle over you now. Let the killing heat of the day fade into the soft blue quiet of the desert after dark, when the sands give back their warmth to the wide and starry sky and everything grows still. There is nothing here you must carry and nothing you must fear. Let the endless dunes stretch away beneath the stars, calm and silver and unhurried, and let their long, slow curves carry your thoughts gently downward, one soft rise and fall after another, all the way down towards sleep. Now let us turn away, for a little while, from the burning sands of that far desert world, and let our thoughts drift instead toward a place as green and gentle as Arrakis is harsh, a world of water and mist and soft gray seas. This is Caladan, an ocean planet lying far from the dunes, a world of rolling waves and rocky shores and old stone castles standing above the tide, a place of rain and gardens and the steady sound of the sea. And Caladan is the home of a noble family whose name will lie at the very heart of everything to come, one of the proud houses of that great assembly we spoke of before, the Landsraad. They are called House Atreides, and of all the families in the Empire, they are among the most respected and the most loved. And so we will spend this quiet hour simply coming to know them, softly and without hurry, as one comes to know good neighbors. At the head of House Atreides stands a man named Duke Leto, and he is the kind of ruler that the worlds do not often see, a lord who is both powerful and genuinely good. He governs Caladan with a fairness and a warmth that his people can feel in their daily lives. And they love him for it, not out of fear and not out of custom, but out of something closer to affection. He is a man of duty and of honor, careful and thoughtful, and yet there is nothing cold in him, for beneath the gravity of his office there beats a deeply human heart. Among all the noble houses of the Landsraad, watching one another so warily across the worlds, Duke Leto has earned a rare thing, a wide and honest respect, and other lords speak his name with a trust they give to very few. To picture him is to picture strength held gently, authority softened by kindness, a father to his world as much as a ruler of it. A great lord, of course, is never alone, and around Duke Leto there stands a small company of remarkable men, loyal to him with a loyalty that goes far past mere service. There is Gurney Halleck, a soldier of scarred face and rough good humor, fierce beyond measure in battle and yet tender in his other hours, for he loves music and will play soft songs upon a small stringed instrument in the quiet times between dangers. He is devoted to the Duke and to the whole house with his whole heart, a warrior who fights as much out of love as out of duty. Beside him there is Duncan Idaho, younger and quicker, one of the finest swordsmen in all the Empire, bold and warm and utterly faithful, the kind of man who would gladly give his life without a moment of hesitation for those he serves. These two, the rough singer and the swift young blade, stand close about the Duke like strong walls about a hearth. And then there is a third man, of a very different kind, a figure who belongs to one of those strange human orders we touched upon before, the ones raised to replace the forbidden thinking machines. His name is Thufir Hawat, and he is a mentat, a human being trained from childhood to reason and calculate with a power and a precision that seems almost more than human, a living mind sharpened into a kind of instrument. Thufir has served the Atreides for a very long time, longer than the young heir has been alive, and he is the house's master of strategy and of secrets, the one who studies every threat and weighs every danger and turns it all over in his vast and tireless thoughts. He is old now and fiercely devoted, and he watches over the family he serves with the wary, sleepless care of a man who has spent his whole life guarding against the treacheries of others. There is one more figure in the close circle of the Duke's life, and she is perhaps the most quietly important of them all. Her name is the Lady Jessica, and she is the Duke's beloved companion, the one who shares his life and his home. Though by the strict customs of that far world, she is called his concubine rather than his wife, bound to him by love rather than by any formal marriage. She is a woman of great beauty and greater self-possession, calm and watchful, with a stillness about her that others find difficult to read, and she carries a secret that runs deeper than her love for the Duke. For the Lady Jessica is one of the Bene Gesserit, a daughter of that ancient sisterhood we met before, trained in all their hidden arts of body and mind. She stands at the Duke's side, both as his heart's companion and as something the wider world does not quite see. A woman whose gentle presence hides a discipline and a purpose reaching back across the long designs of her order. So this is House Atreides, gathered here for you in the soft light of their ocean home. There is Duke Leto, just and beloved, a ruler good all the way through. There is Gurney Halleck with his scars and his songs, and Duncan Idaho with his bright quick blade, and old Thufir Hawat with his vast and tireless mind, each of them bound to the house by a loyalty that is almost love. And there is the Lady Jessica, calm and beautiful, companion of the Duke's heart and daughter of the secret sisterhood, holding her own quiet mysteries close. Together they make something rare among the cold and grasping houses of the Empire, a family and a household in which trust and warmth are real, a hearth worth serving and worth loving. And yet, gentle as all this is, There is a shadow gathering at the edge of it, and it is only fair, before we let this chapter drift toward rest, to feel that shadow softly stirring. For the very goodness of House Atreides, the wide respect that Duke Leto has earned, the loyalty that gathers so readily around him, all of it has begun to draw a dangerous kind of attention. In an empire held together by a careful balance of jealous powers, a house that rises too high in the affection of the others becomes, without ever meaning to, a threat to those who sit above it. Duke Leto's honor makes other lords trust him, and their trust makes him strong, and his strength, quietly, without any fault of his own, begins to trouble the sleep of those who fear any rival to the throne. The Atreides are rising, admired and beloved, and it is precisely this that has begun to place them in peril, for in that far and watchful world, to be too widely loved is itself a quiet danger. But that danger is not for tonight, and we will not chase it into the dark. For now, let the shadow stay where it is, far off at the edge of things, and let your thoughts rest instead upon the good and gentle heart of this house, upon the green world of Caladan and its old stone castle above the sea. Picture the gray waves rolling in and breaking softly on the shore, over and over, patient and unending. Picture the lamps lit warm in the castle windows, and the sound of Gurney's quiet music drifting through the halls, and the Duke and the Lady Jessica standing together at a high window, looking out over the water in the failing light. It is a good place, full of love, and for this one quiet hour, it is safe. Let that safety hold you now. Let the sound of the sea come and go, soft and slow beneath the mist, washing gently against the shore of your thoughts. There is nothing here to trouble you, and nothing you need carry. Let the warm lamplight of Caladan glow a little dimmer, and let the tide of the gray sea rock you, easy and unhurried, all the way down towards sleep. Every gentle story needs its shadow, and so tonight, softly and without fear, we turn to meet the family that stands opposite the good House Atreides, the enemies who have waited long years in the dark for their moment. Where the Atreides are beloved and just, these are cruel and grasping. Where Caladan is green and washed by clean gray seas, their world is a place of iron and smoke and hard artificial light. They are called House Harkonnen, and although there is nothing warm in them at all, we need not dread them as we speak of them. For we meet them here only as figures in a tale, held at a safe distance, the way one might look at a storm through a thick and steady window while sitting warm inside. The Harkonnen homeworld is called Yeti Prime, and it is as different from the ocean world of Caladan as it is possible for a world to be. Picture a planet given over almost entirely to industry, its surface scarred with vast works and dark refineries, its skies dimmed by the smoke of endless labor, its cities harsh and crowded, and lit by a sickly, joyless glare. There are few gardens here and little kindness, for Giedi Prime is a world built to produce and to consume, a place where power is measured in wealth, and wealth is squeezed out of the toil of the many for the pleasure of the few. It is a fitting home for the family that rules it, a world that mirrors their own hard and hungry hearts, and simply to imagine, it is to feel how far we have come from the soft mist and rolling waves of the Atreides shore. At the center of House Harkonnen sits its master, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and he is a figure so monstrous that he seems almost carved out of the very appetites that drive him. He is enormously fat, so heavy that his own body can no longer bear its weight, and so he floats through his dark halls held up by hidden devices, drifting like some pale and bloated thing suspended above the ground. But it would be a mistake to think him foolish, for behind his cruelty there lies a mind of real cunning, patient and scheming and endlessly ambitious. He delights in the suffering of others and in the slow, careful working of his plots. And he has spent a long life gathering wealth and power to his house with a cold, tireless greed. The Baron is the dark engine at the heart of everything the Harkonnens do, clever and cruel in equal measure, and utterly without mercy. Around the Baron stand two younger men of his own blood, his nephews, each of them a different shade of the family's cruelty. The first is called Raban, and he is the blunt and brutal one, a heavy, violent man who rules through fear and force, and the simple crushing of anyone who stands against him. Raban does not scheme or subtly plan. He strikes and breaks and grinds down, and the Baron uses him as one might use a hammer, for the work that calls for open brutality rather than for cleverness. The second nephew is a very different creature, and in some ways a more dangerous one. His name is Feyd-Rautha, and he is young and handsome and cold, sharp of mind where his brother is merely strong, ambitious and calculating and dangerously charming. The Baron looks upon Feyd-Rautha as the true heir of his own cunning, the one being groomed to carry the house forward. And there is in the young man a patient, watchful malice that is far more chilling than his brother's open violence. So there they stand, the three of them, the dark mirror of the warm household we came to know before. There is the Baron, vast and floating and cruel and clever, delighting in his plots. There is Raban, the brutal hammer, ruling by terror. And there is Feyd-Rautha, cold and handsome and sharp, the cunning heir, waiting quietly in the wings. It is a family bound together, not by love, as the Atreides are, but by shared appetite and shared ambition, each one useful to the others, each one watchful of the rest. And this hard and hungry house has set its whole will, across long years, upon a single burning purpose, which brings us to the old and bitter feud that lies at the heart of all that is to come. For House Harkonnen and House Atreides are not merely rivals. They are ancient enemies, bound together by a hatred so old that its first cause has half passed into legend. Long ago, in the deep past of both families, there fell out between them a terrible quarrel, a wound of pride and blood that was never healed. And from that day forward, each house has looked upon the other as its truest foe. Down through the long generations, that hatred has been carried like a dark inheritance, passed from father to son and from lord to heir, never forgotten and never forgiven, waiting always for the chance to strike. To the Harkonnens, the very existence of House Atreides is an old insult that has never been answered, and the goodness and the growing fame of Duke Leto only feed the ancient resentment, making it burn all the hotter in the shadows. There is another thread woven into this hatred, and it leads us straight back to the desert world we spoke of before. For it was House Harkonnen that held Arrakis for a long stretch of years before our story truly begins, ruling the dunes and reaping the precious spice. And they grew monstrously wealthy in the doing of it. Think of the Harkonnens upon that burning world, caring nothing for its people or its sands, thinking only of how much of the glowing dust they could tear from the desert and sell into the empire. For decades they stripped Arrakis of its treasure with a hard and joyless efficiency, filling their coffers on Giedi Prime with the riches of the sand, and driving the desert folk ever harder. And it is largely upon this spice wealth that the whole grim power of the house was built. To the Harkonnens, Arrakis is not a world at all, but a prize, a thing to be squeezed dry, and their long grip upon it made them rich beyond measure and crueler with every passing year. And so, as this quiet chapter draws toward its close, feel how all the pieces of a great and dangerous design have come into place, without needing to worry over what is yet to come. There is a hard industrial world of smoke and iron, and upon it a cruel and cunning family. There is a monstrous floating baron and his brutal nephew Raban, and his cold, clever nephew, Feyd-Rautha. There is an ancient hatred, older than any living memory, carried down the generations against the good House Atreides. And there is the long, dark wealth of the spice, wrung out of the desert across many years, that made the Harkonnens what they are. All of this has waited, patiently, in the shadows, for the moment when it might at last be turned against the family they most despise. And that moment, though not tonight, is drawing near. But let none of that trouble your rest. Remember that you are watching this storm through a thick and steady window, warm and safe and far away, and that the dark works of Giedi Prime cannot reach the quiet room in which you lie. Let the harsh light and the smoke fade from your thoughts, and let the cruel faces soften and drift out of view, growing dim and distant like figures in a picture seen from across a great hall. There is nothing here that can touch you. Let the shadows settle and grow still. Let your breath come slow and easy, and let the darkness around you turn from something watched into something kind. A soft and quiet dark that gently gathers you in and carries you down towards sleep. We have met the good house, and we have met the cruel one, and now, softly, we come to the third hand in the design that is quietly closing around House Atreides, the highest hand of all. For a trap this great could never be sprung by the Harkonnens alone, however wealthy and cunning they might be. It needed the blessing and the secret help of the one figure who sits above every noble house in all the empire, the distant lord we spoke of on the very first night, the Padishah Emperor himself. Tonight we come to know him a little, and to understand the part he plays, and though it is a story of a cruel betrayal being planned, we will move through it gently, the way one traces the outline of a dark thing by candlelight, calmly and without alarm. The emperor of this age bears the name Shaddam, fourth of that name to hold the throne, and so he is called Shaddam the Fourth. Picture him upon the great imperial seat, master of countless worlds, the summit of all that vast and ancient structure of power, a man who has spent his whole life at the very top of everything and grown used to being obeyed. He is proud and shrewd, watchful of any threat to his supremacy, and beneath his splendor there runs a thin, cold thread of fear, the particular fear of one who has everything and dreads, above all, to lose any part of it. For all his grandeur, the emperor does not truly rule the empire alone. He holds his place by the same careful balance we have spoken of, leaning against the noble houses and the guild and the sisterhood. And he knows, as such men always know, that a balance can tip. The emperor's true strength, the thing that lets him stand above all the proud houses of the Landsraad, lies in his soldiers, and they are a terror unlike anything else in the known worlds. They are called the Sardaukar, and they are warriors raised from childhood on a harsh and merciless prison world, trained in cruelty and hardship until they become fighters of almost unbelievable ferocity and skill. No ordinary army can stand against them, no house keeps soldiers their equal. The very name of the Sardaukar is enough to still a room, for everyone in the empire understands that behind the emperor's calm words there waits this dreadful and disciplined force, ready to descend upon any world that dares defy the throne. It is the Sardaukar, more than any crown or title, that hold the whole empire in awe of its emperor. And it is the Sardaukar who will play their own quiet part in the snare now being laid. And here we come to the fear that sets the whole dark plan in motion, a fear that grows, strangely enough, not from any wrongdoing, but from too much goodness. For the emperor, watching the worlds from his high throne, has been watching House Atreides with a steadily deepening unease. He has seen how widely Duke Leto is respected, how the other noble houses trust him and speak well of him, how loyalty gathers around him as naturally as warmth gathers around a fire. He has heard how the Atreides soldiers are becoming skilled and devoted, and how the Duke's name is spoken with an affection that no amount of mere power can command. And in all of this, the Emperor sees, or believes he sees, a danger to himself. For a lord so widely loved might one day become a rival for the loyalty of the Empire, and even, in some distant imagining, a rival for the throne itself. It is a bitter thing to sit with, and worth pausing over softly, that Duke Leto's very virtues have become the reason for his ruin. He has done nothing treacherous, plotted nothing against his emperor, sought nothing beyond the honorable governance of his own house. And yet it is precisely his honor that frightens the man above him. For in a court built on suspicion, a good and beloved lord is more troubling than a cruel one, since goodness draws hearts, and hearts are the one thing an emperor can never simply command. So Shaddam IV, looking down upon the rising Atreides, feels the cold thread of his fear tighten, and begins to wish, quietly and shamefully, that this admirable house were gone. And a wish of that kind, in a man of that power, does not stay a wish for long. So the Emperor turns, in secret, to the one house whose hatred of the Atreides he can rely upon utterly, and reaches out a hidden hand to the Harkonnens. Here the two dark purposes meet and fuse into one, the Baron's ancient longing to destroy his old enemy, and the Emperor's cold wish to remove a rising rival, each one finding in the other exactly the partner it requires. Together, in the shadows, they shape a plan of terrible cleverness, a trap so well disguised that it will look, to all the watching worlds, like a great and generous gift. And the bait of that trap, the shining lure at its center, is the very desert world upon which the whole empire depends, the planet Arrakis and its endless spice. The plan runs like this, and it is worth telling slowly, for its cruelty lies in its neatness. The Emperor will publicly take Arrakis away from the Harkonnens, who have held it and grown rich upon it for so long, and he will bestow it instead, with every appearance of high honor, upon Duke Leto and House Atreides. To all the Empire, it will seem a magnificent reward, the richest prize in all the worlds handed to its most deserving lord, a mark of the Emperor's favor and trust. Duke Leto, though he will surely sense the danger in so sudden a gift, cannot refuse it without insulting his Emperor, and so he must go, taking his household and his loyal men from the safe green world of Caladan to the exposed and treacherous sands of Arrakis, into a place where the Harkonnens know every secret and hold every hidden advantage. And there, upon the desert world, the true face of the gift will show itself. For the Harkonnens will not truly be gone. They will leave behind their agents and their traps and their long knowledge of the planet. And when the moment is ripe, they will fall upon the unsuspecting Atreides with all their strength, and they will not fall alone, for this is the darkest thread of the design. The Emperor will lend his own dread Sardaukar to the assault, disguised so that no one may know the throne itself had any hand in it. Hidden soldiers of terrible skill sent secretly to make certain that House Atreides is not merely defeated, but destroyed utterly. A generous gift on the surface, and beneath it a snare with iron jaws, waiting on the sand for a good man to walk into it, believing he has been honored. So there it is, the whole shape of the trap, laid out gently before you in the quiet dark. There is the proud and frightened Emperor upon his throne, and his terrible hidden Sardaukar. There is his cold fear of a lord too widely loved. There is his secret pact with the cruel and eager Harkonnens. And there is the shining bait of Arrakis, offered as a reward and meant as a grave. All of it is in place now, patient and terrible, and House Atreides, still safe upon its ocean world, does not yet fully know what is coming. But you need carry none of this weight with you into sleep. The trap is not yet sprung, and the good house still stands, and the night around you is soft and safe, and far from every scheme. Let the cold high halls of the Emperor grow dim and distant in your thoughts. Let the whispered plots fall silent, and let the whole dark design fade back into the shadows where it waits. There is nothing here that asks anything of you now. Let your breath slow and deepen. Let the quiet gather close and warm around you, and let yourself drift down, gently and without fear, past all the far thrones and hidden soldiers, all the way down into rest. Now, while the great powers gather their pieces around the desert world, let us turn softly toward one of the quietest forces in all the empire. A force that works without armies and without thrones, and yet has shaped the fate of worlds for longer than most kings can remember. This is the sisterhood known as the Bene Gesserit, an ancient order of women whose true reach almost no one outside their walls has ever fully seen. They are advisors to the powerful, teachers to the daughters of the great houses, and companions to emperors. And in each of these roles, they are underestimated, which is exactly how they wish to be. For the sisterhood learned long ago that the surest way to move the world is to move it gently from behind, in ways that leave no fingerprints and draw no eyes. To understand them, it helps to remember how strange and disciplined the human mind and body had become in this far future. Long ago, after the banning of the thinking machines, men and women turned inward and began to train themselves to do what the old machines once had done. The Bene Gesserit carried this training further than anyone. A fully schooled sister could read the smallest flicker of a person's face, the faint change in breath, the tiny tightening at the corner of an eye, and from these read the truth beneath any smooth and careful surface. She could control the beating of her own heart, slow the spread of a poison within her blood, and school every muscle of her body to perfect stillness or perfect grace. And she could learn a way of speaking layered into the very tone of her voice that could bend the will of an untrained listener and press upon them a command they would obey almost before they knew they had heard it. To those who did not understand, these gifts looked like sorcery. They were not sorcery. They were only the fruit of thousands of years of patient, secret work upon the raw material of the human self. But the sisterhood was not content to shape only the living. Their deepest and most patient labor reached across the generations into the unborn. Over many long centuries, the Bene Gesserit had quietly guided the marriages and the bloodlines of the great houses, whispering advice, arranging unions, nudging one heir toward another, keeping careful record of which family carried which strengths in its blood. This vast and secret work was their breeding program, and it stretched back so far that no single sister had ever seen its beginning, and none yet living expected to see its end. It moved at the pace of dynasties, one careful step in each generation, and it was aimed at a single distant goal. A goal so large that most of the sisters who served it would die long before it could be reached. That goal had a name, spoken only rarely and always with a kind of hush. The sisterhood sought to bring into the world a certain child, a being they called the Kwisatz Haderach. The words meant, in the old tongue, something like the one who could be in many places at once, the shortening of the way. He would be a male Bene Gesserit, a man able to do all that the sisters could do and more, and above all a mind able to look into a place the sisters themselves could never enter. For among all their powers, there was one door the women could not open. A trained sister could reach back into the memories of her mothers and her grandmothers, and all the mothers before them, an unbroken chain of lives remembered within her. Yet there was a dark region in that inner world, a place their sight could not pass, and it turned them away as if from a great and dreadful shadow. The Kwisatz Haderach, they believed, would be the one who could stand in that place and look, and see not only backward through the past, but forward across the branching paths of what might yet come. A person who could see across time itself, with such a one in the world, guided quietly by the sisterhood, they believed the future of humankind might at last be steered away from ruin. There was another kind of quiet work the Bene Gesserit had woven through the Empire, softer than the breeding program, yet no less patient. And it too would matter greatly on the sands of Dune. Wherever the sisterhood traveled, and they traveled everywhere, they carried with them a careful practice of planting stories. On far and dangerous worlds, on planets where a stranded sister might one day need shelter or a captured sister might need rescue, they seeded beliefs into the local faith. They shaped legends and left them to grow. Tales of protectors and prophecies of holy figures who would one day come. This gentle sowing of belief had its own name within the order. It was called the Missionaria Protectiva, the protective mission, and its purpose was simple and cool. A world that already expected a savior could be turned, at need, into a refuge. For a stranger who arrived speaking the right words and performing the right signs would be received not as an outsider, but as the fulfillment of an ancient hope. The sisterhood did not believe these planted prophecies. They had made them. But they knew that a belief, once rooted deep enough in the hearts of a people, becomes a real and living power, as solid as stone and far harder to move. Upon the desert world of Arrakis, among the hardy people of the sand, such seeds had been planted long ages before, and there they had taken root more deeply than perhaps the sisterhood ever intended. The desert folk had come to hold, deep in the marrow of their faith, the belief that one day a figure would come to them from the outer world, a voice not born of the sand who would nonetheless know their ways, a mother of great wisdom and a son who would lead them and set them free. They watched for the signs of this coming with a patience as vast as the dunes themselves, keeping the old words alive across the harsh generations, waiting without hurry for a promise they were sure would one day be kept. They did not know that the promise had been placed among them like a tool left in a drawer, ready for a hand that had not yet arrived. They knew only that it was holy, and that it was theirs, and that it was true. And so 2 long patient labors of the sisterhood had come, across the centuries, to point toward the same distant place. On one side, the endless careful weaving of bloodlines, edging generation by generation toward the birth of the one who could see across time. On the other, the quiet legend sleeping in the hearts of a desert people, a prepared and waiting soil that could receive such a figure and lift him up as a savior sent from beyond. Neither the sisters who guided the marriages nor the desert folk who guarded the prophecy could see how near the joining of these 2 threads had come. They only continued, each in their own way, the slow work of belief and blood, trusting the future to unfold as it always had, one small and unremarkable step at a time. There is something restful in the sheer patience of it all, in powers so old and so sure that they measure their plans not in years but in lifetimes stacked upon lifetimes, content to wait through 100 quiet generations for a single flowering. And so we may let these women and their long designs settle gently into the dark at the edge of our story. The sisterhood in their shadowed halls counting the bloodlines like a keeper counting stars. The desert people beneath their sand keeping a candle lit for a coming they have never seen. Let the great slow machinery of it turn softly in the distance, asking nothing of you, while the night deepens and the sands lie cool and still, and everything waits, unhurried, for the one who is already, quietly, on his way. And now the 2 long threads we have been following, the patient weaving of bloodlines and the sleeping legend in the sand, draw near at last to a single quiet room on the green ocean world of Caladan, where a boy lies sleeping in the deep hours of the night. His name is Paul, and he is the only son of Duke Leto of House Atreides and of the Lady Jessica, the Duke's beloved companion, who is also, though few outside the household know it, a daughter of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. He is young, still more child than man, slight of build and quiet of manner, watchful in the way of children who have grown up among careful and clever adults. To the household he is simply the young master, the heir, a bright and gentle boy being raised with love and discipline for the day the dukedom will pass to him. Almost no one who watches him at his lessons suspects that he stands, all unknowing, at the very center of designs far older than his family, far older than his world. For Paul has begun, of late, to dream. Not the ordinary dreams of a boy, the tangled and forgettable pictures that fade before breakfast, but dreams that arrive with a strange, clean weight and that stay with him through the day, refusing to loosen their hold. He dreams of a place he has never been, a world without oceans, a land of endless dunes stretching golden and dry beneath two moons, a place of heat and thirst utterly unlike the wet green world he has always known. He dreams of caverns hidden beneath the sand, of a great desert night crowded with stars, and again he dreams of a girl, a young woman of the desert with a solemn face and eyes of a deep and startling blue, blue within blue, eyes with no white in them at all. She moves through his sleep like someone he has always known and not yet met, and he wakes with the shape of her lingering behind his eyes, certain without knowing how that she is real and that somewhere, waiting, she is looking toward him as he is looking toward her. He cannot explain these dreams, and he does not know that they are the first faint stirrings of a sight that will one day reach across time itself. He knows only that they feel less like fancy and more like memory, memory of something that has not yet happened. To understand how such a boy came to be, we must return for a moment to his mother, and to a choice she made in secret, a choice that broke one of the deepest rules of her order. The Bene Gesserit, in their long weaving of bloodlines, had set for Jessica a single clear task. She was to bear the Duke a daughter, and only a daughter. That girl, in the sisterhood's design, would one day be wed into the very house that hated the Atreides most, and from that union, one generation further on, the long-awaited superbeing might at last be born, brought safely into the world under the sisterhood's careful hand. This was the plan of centuries, and Jessica had been raised to serve it. Yet Jessica loved the Duke, loved him in a way the cool sisterhood had never meant her to, and she knew that Leto longed above all for a son, an heir to carry the name of Atreides forward. And so, quietly, out of love, she disobeyed. Using the deep control her training had given her over her own body, she chose to conceive a son rather than a daughter, and she gave the Duke the boy he wished for. She could not have known how much would turn upon that single tender act of defiance, that in reaching for love she had set the great design running a full generation ahead of its makers, and placed in the world a child the sisterhood had not planned for, and could not fully control. So Paul grew, cherished and carefully taught, and his education was unlike that of any ordinary heir. His father's loyal men gave him the skills a duke would need, the arts of the blade and the shield, the reading of men and of situations, the cool discipline of command. And his mother, in quiet hours, gave him something stranger and rarer, the beginnings of the Bene Gesserit training itself, the schooling of body and mind that no man was ever meant to receive. She taught him to observe, to notice the small truths people let slip without knowing, to master his own fear, and his own breathing, to still his thoughts and reach for a clarity beneath them. She even began to teach him the layered command hidden in the voice, that subtle power to bend the will of others. In all of this, the boy showed a quickness that both delighted and unsettled his mother, for he learned what took the sisters long years to master, and he learned it as though some part of him were merely remembering. It was this uncommon promise that at last drew the attention of the sisterhood itself, in the person of a very old and very powerful woman who came to Caladan to see the boy for herself. She was a reverend mother, one of the highest of the order, and she came to put Paul to a test, an ancient and secret trial the sisterhood used to measure whether a person was fully human or merely an animal wearing a human shape. The test was cruel in its design. The old woman placed the boy's hand into a small, dark box that held within it a terrible, burning pain. A pain with no true injury behind it, only the pure sensation of agony. And at his neck, she held a tiny poisoned needle called the gam jabar, so that if he pulled his hand from the box to escape the pain, the needle would end his life. The whole trial rested upon a single hard question: whether the boy could hold still through unbearable suffering, whether the thinking part of him could master the animal part that screamed at him to flee. It was a test that measured the very quality the sisterhood most prized, the mind's rule over instinct, and it had broken many who faced it. Paul endured it. Through a pain that felt as though the flesh of his hand were curling and blackening away, he held himself still, drawing upon everything his mother had taught him, until the old woman drew back the needle and let him withdraw his unharmed hand. She had never, in all her long years, seen a child bear so much, and in that quiet, exhausted moment there passed between the old reverend mother and the watching mother a shared and wordless understanding, a recognition that this boy was something the sisterhood had not seen before, something that did not fit their charts and their careful generations, a possibility arriving too soon and from the wrong direction. He was more than a duke's young heir. He was more, perhaps, than a boy at all. What exactly he might become, none of them could yet say. And the old woman departed carrying her doubts and her wonder with her back into the wider empire. And so we leave Paul as we found him, a slight and watchful boy on a green and gentle world, loved by his father and his mother, schooled in secret arts, and visited in the night by dreams of a desert he has never walked, and a blue-eyed girl he has never met. He does not know what he is, or what waits for him beneath those far golden dunes. He knows only the ordinary shape of his days, the sea outside his window, the voices of the men who guard him, the quiet love that surrounds him still. Let him rest there a while longer, in that last untroubled peace, the boy at the center of everything who does not yet know it, breathing softly in the dark of Caladan while the tide comes in beneath the moon. And let the calm of that green and sheltered world settle over you as well, gentle and unhurried, carrying you softly down towards sleep. And so the day came at last when House Atreides had to leave the green and gentle world of Caladan behind and take up the poisoned gift the Emperor had given them. The family gathered their household, their loyal men, their guards and servants, and all the machinery of rule, and crossed the great dark between the stars to the desert world of Arrakis, to the dry planet also called Dune, there to govern the spice and to hold the richest prize in the empire. It was meant to look like a triumph, a noble house raised higher than ever before, and to the wider empire that is exactly how it looked. But the Duke and his closest men knew better. They understood, with a clear and steady dread, that they had been handed this world not as a reward, but as a snare, that somewhere beneath the shine of the honor lay the shape of a trap, and that their enemies, and perhaps the Emperor himself, were waiting for them to walk into it. Duke Leto did what a wise and just leader could do in such a place. He set about winning the desert world rather than merely seizing it. He looked at the hardy people of the sand, the Fremen, whom the previous rulers had despised and hunted as vermin, and he saw in them not a nuisance, but a strength, a people worth respect and worth alliance. He reached toward them carefully, hoping to make of them friends and even soldiers, dreaming of a desert power that might one day stand equal to any army in the empire. His men worked to learn the ways of the sand, to understand the spice harvest and the great worms that guarded it, to build something lasting upon this harsh and unforgiving ground. For a little while it seemed that House Atreides, with its honor and its good faith, might yet turn the trap into a true home, might yet outgrow the snare that had been laid for it. But the danger closed in more quietly and more surely than the Duke could counter. All around the family the small signs of betrayal began to gather, faint at first, easy to mistake, and then harder and harder to explain away. There were failures where there should have been none, gaps opening in defenses that ought to have held, a slow and creeping sense that the walls of their new home were not as solid as they seemed. The Duke's loyal men strained to find the traitor they were sure was hidden among them, for they knew that no enemy could bring down a shielded house from the outside alone, that a great house falls only when a hand from within opens the door. They searched, and they suspected, and they guarded what they could. Yet the true betrayer was not one they thought to fear, and the hand upon the door was the last hand any of them would have doubted. Among the household there was a doctor, a gentle and learned man named Wellington Yueh, trusted utterly, bound by the deepest and most sacred conditioning of his profession, a conditioning that was believed to make betrayal by such a man simply impossible. And yet the enemy had found the one lever that could move even him. They had taken his beloved wife, and they held her life and her suffering over him, and with that unbearable weight, they broke what everyone had believed unbreakable. The doctor did not turn traitor out of greed or hatred. He turned because he was a man in agony, offered the faint and false hope of saving the one he loved, and because he had made his own bitter plan of vengeance folded inside his surrender. He would open the door, but he would also, in his own quiet way, try to strike at the ones who had ruined him. It was the choice of a broken heart, and it would cost the house everything. And then came the night. In the deep dark of Arrakis, the capital seat of the Atreides upon the desert world, the doctor did the thing he had been forced to do. The great protective shield that guarded the household, the invisible barrier that should have held any assault at bay, went dark and fell. And with it fell the last defense of the house. Out of the night the enemy poured in, the cruel soldiers of House Harkonnen, come to reclaim the world they had been made to give up. And with them, hidden beneath borrowed colors, came the dread Sardaukar, the Emperor's own terrible warriors, lent in secret to make certain the work was done. The two hatreds that had waited so long, the old feud and the Emperor's cold fear, arrived together in the same dark hour, and the house that had crossed the stars in honor found itself overwhelmed in a single night. Let us tell of that night softly, for it is a sorrowful thing, and there is no need to linger in its violence. The loyal men of House Atreides fought as such men fight, with courage and without hope, and one by one the lights of that proud household went out. The Duke himself was taken, brought low not on a field of battle, but through treachery, drugged and helpless, delivered into the hands of the very enemies who had schemed for generations to see him fall. He was carried before the monstrous Baron who ruled House Harkonnen, the swollen and gloating master of all this cruelty, to be savored as the prize of a long and patient hatred. Yet even in that last extremity, the broken doctor's hidden plan reached forward. He had given the fallen Duke a final secret weapon, a desperate means to strike one blow from beyond all hope, and Leto used it. He did not save himself, for he was already lost, but he did not go quietly into the dark, and he took a measure of the enemy with him as he fell. So died Duke Leto Atreides, a just and beloved leader. Betrayed by trust and undone by a trap he had seen coming and could not escape, his house shattered around him in the space of a single terrible night. By the time the desert dawn came creeping over Arrakis, the thing was done. The banners of House Atreides had fallen. Its loyal men were scattered or slain, its stronghold seized, its great work upon the sand undone as if it had never been. The Harkonnens walked once more through the halls of the world they had been forced to surrender, richer and crueler than before, and the Emperor's secret soldiers melted away into the night to leave no proof of the crime. To the wider empire, it would seem that a proud house had simply overreached itself and failed, that Arrakis had proven too much for the Atreides, a quiet tragedy of ambition and misfortune. Almost no one would ever know the true shape of it, the trap laid at the highest level, the honor turned into a snare, the trusted hand upon the door. A great and noble family, admired across 1,000 worlds, had been erased between one sunset and the next. And yet the enemy's triumph was not quite complete, though they did not yet know it. In all the ruin of that night, in all the careful cruelty of the plan, 2 threads had slipped loose. 2 lives had not been accounted for, carried away into the dark beyond the reach of the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar. But that is a thread for another quiet hour. For now, let us simply lay this sorrow down as gently as it deserves. The fall of a good house remembered softly from a great and peaceful distance, a grief long finished and long healed, nothing here to trouble your rest. Let the desert dawn come slow and rose gold over the fallen towers. Let the sands lie quiet where the noble house once stood, and let the sadness of it settle far away, soft as a closing door, while you breathe out slow and easy and drift on towards sleep. Those 2 threads that slipped loose in the ruin of that terrible night were the boy Paul and his mother, the Lady Jessica. In all the careful cruelty of the enemy's plan, the 2 of them had not simply been forgotten. They had been meant to die, but to die in a particular way. A way the Harkonnens found fitting for the last of a hated house. Rather than being cut down cleanly in the fall of Arrakis, mother and son were bound and taken up into a small flying craft, carried out over the vast and empty dunes far from any help, and left to be abandoned there in the deep desert, cast out into the great dry waste to perish of heat and thirst where no one would ever find their bones. The enemy thought this a neat and quiet ending, the pair of them swallowed by the sands without a trace, the last of the Atreides erased not by a blade, but by the desert itself. But the enemy had made a small mistake, for they did not truly understand what Jessica was. Even bound and guarded, a fully trained daughter of the sisterhood was never wholly helpless, and in the close and careless quarters of that little craft she found her moment. With the hidden arts of her order, with the layered command in her voice, and the swift sure skill of her body, she and her son turned the tables on their captors in the air, and instead of being dumped like refuse onto the sand, they came down alive and free, alone in the immensity of the desert, with the wreck of the craft behind them and nothing before them but dunes to every horizon. They had escaped their execution, but they had escaped into a wilderness that killed as surely and as patiently as any executioner, a place with no water, no shelter, and no mercy, where survival was measured not in years, but in hours. Their first ordeal was the desert itself. Before they could think of enemies or of rescue, they had to face the raw fact of the sand. the killing heat of the day and the deep cold of the night. The terrible dryness that pulls the water from a living body with every breath. And then, as if the desert wished to test them further, there came a storm. One of the great sandstorms of Arrakis. A wall of wind and grit vast enough to strip flesh from bone and to swallow the sky itself. Such storms were among the most feared things upon that world, powerful enough to tear a machine apart in the air. Into the edge of that fury the two fugitives were driven, and they endured the crash and the chaos of it, the roar and the darkness and the endless stinging sand, until at last the great wind passed on across the dunes and left them, battered and gasping, but somehow still alive, deposited in some new and unknown fold of the desert beneath a sky slowly clearing to stars. And so came their first night truly alone in the deep desert, the two of them, mother and son, with nothing in all the world but each other and the sand. Above them, the desert sky opened in a way no sky on their green home world had ever done, an immense black vault crowded thick with stars, cold and clear and utterly indifferent, and two moons riding slow across it. Everything they had known was gone. The ocean world, the noble house, the loyal men, the father and Duke. All the great machinery of their old life had been swept away in a single night, and what remained was this: a boy and his mother huddled together in the vast quiet of the dunes, fugitives with no name that could help them, no army, no shelter, no certain path to anywhere at all. It was a moment that might have crushed the spirit utterly, and yet in its strange way it was also clean, stripped down to the barest truth of survival. And in that bareness something new began to stir. For the desert of Arrakis was not empty in the way it seemed. The very air of that world was faintly touched with the spice, the precious dust that lay all through the sand and drifted always on the wind. And now Paul, cast into the deep desert, with no walls between him and that world, breathed it in with every breath, drank it in through his very skin, saturated by it as he had never been before. And the spice, as we have learned, does strange things to the mind, and to a mind already stirring with strange gifts, it did something stranger still. Under the flood of it that first desert night, the faint dreaming sight that had visited the boy on Caladan came rushing open into something vast and terrible and clear. It was as though a door within him that had stood only slightly ajar was flung wide by a great wind, and through it poured not one future, but many. Countless branching paths spreading out before his inner eye, an endless fan of things that might come to pass, blooming and dividing and blooming again, beyond all counting. This was the true awakening of Paul's prescient sight, and it was nothing gentle. To see one future is a strange enough gift, but to see all of them at once, every possible turning of every possible choice, spreading outward like the branches of an infinite tree, is a burden almost past bearing. He saw himself living and dying 1,000 ways. He saw paths that ended quickly in the sand and paths that ran on for many years. He saw faces he had not yet met and places he had never been. The same blue-eyed desert girl of his old dreams moving through many of the possible tomorrows, and running through so many of those branching paths, appearing again and again, no matter which way the future seemed to bend. He glimpsed one shape that filled him with a dread deeper than anything the desert could threaten. He saw a great war carried out among the stars in his own name, legions of fervent warriors pouring off this desert world and across the empire beneath a banner, worlds falling and multitudes dying, a holy war of unimaginable slaughter sweeping the galaxy, and himself somehow at the burning center of it. It was his first true glimpse of the thing he would spend so much of his life dreading and struggling against, the terrible possibility folded into his own becoming. seen now for the first time by a boy sitting stunned in the cold desert dark. He could not yet understand all of it, and he could not yet tell which of the countless paths would prove real and which would fade unchosen. The visions did not come as neat prophecies, but as an overwhelming flood, dazzling and exhausting, leaving him shaken and changed and older somehow than he had been at the fall of night. His mother watched over him through it, sensing that something profound was moving in her son, that the desert and the spice were opening in him, something she had helped to seed and could no longer guide. Together they came at last, through that endless first night, the boy carrying now a weight of sight no child should carry, the mother carrying the unborn life within her and the ruin of all their hopes, the two of them bound closer than ever by the sheer fact that they had no one and nothing else. And so we may leave them there for now, at the edge of the deep desert dawn, two survivors of a fallen house, alive against all the enemy's design, fugitives with nothing but each other and the sand. Everything has been taken from them, and yet they are still breathing, still together, still moving forward into a world they do not yet understand. There is a strange peace in that bare survival, in having lost so much that there is nothing left to fear losing, only the next breath and the next step, and the wide quiet dunes turning slowly toward the light. Let the desert lie still and cooling around them as the first pale gold touches the sand. Let the terrible visions settle and fade into the calm of morning. And let that same calm settle over you as well, soft and unhurried, carrying you gently down toward sleep. Now let us turn to meet the people whose world Paul and his mother had fallen into. The desert folk of Arrakis, the ones the rest of the Empire barely troubled to think about, and who would prove, in time, to be the most remarkable people on that or any other world. They are called the Fremen, and for generations the great houses and the spice merchants had looked upon them as little more than savages, ragged wanderers of the deep sand, a nuisance to be driven off or hunted down, too poor and too primitive to matter. This was one of the greatest and most costly mistakes anyone in the Empire ever made. For the Fremen were not savages at all. They were the true masters of the harshest world in the known universe, a people who had learned to live where everyone else could only die. And beneath their patched robes and their quiet watchfulness there lay a strength and a discipline that the soft rulers of the Empire could scarcely imagine. To live on Arrakis, where water is rarer than any jewel and the sun kills without haste or mercy, the Fremen had shaped their entire way of life around the saving of every precious drop of moisture. Their most remarkable craft was a garment they wore against the body called a stillsuit, a marvel of desert making that captured the water a body loses through sweat and breath and even waste, cleaned it, and returned it to the wearer to be drunk again, so that a Fremen sealed properly into such a suit could walk the open desert for days and lose almost nothing of the water within. To an outsider this seemed a grim and strange thing, but to the Fremen it was simply life, the plain sense of a people who understood that on this world water was not a comfort, but the very substance of survival, to be hoarded and honored above gold. And water was indeed honored among them as a sacred thing, holy in a way that the wet worlds of the Empire could never quite understand. Among the Fremen, water was wealth and water was life, and it belonged not only to the one who carried it, but to the whole community. When one of their number died, the water of the body itself was reclaimed, carefully and reverently, for it was too precious to be given up to the sand, and it was counted then as belonging to the tribe, a last gift from the fallen to the living. To spill water needlessly, to weep even, was a thing of deep meaning among them, for a tear was moisture given to the dead and to the desert, the most solemn offering a Fremen could make. In all of this there was nothing of squalor, and everything of a fierce and careful reverence, a whole faith and a whole civilization built around the saving of what the rest of the empire threw away without a thought. The Fremen did not live scattered and lost upon the open dunes, as outsiders imagined. They made their homes hidden away beneath the rock and the sand, in great sheltered caverns they called sietches, secret communities cool and dark and safe from the killing sun, where whole tribes lived their lives out of sight of the world above. Within these hidden places there was warmth and order and abundance of a kind no outsider suspected. Gardens of a sort, stores of water kept in vast guarded pools that were the treasure and the trust of the whole people, and a rich and living culture of custom and belief passed down through the hard generations. The Fremen kept their sietches and their numbers a careful secret, letting the rulers above believe them few and feeble, and all the while they were far more numerous and far stronger than anyone knew, a great hidden nation biding its time beneath the sand. Their long life on the spice, breathed and eaten every day, had even marked their very eyes, staining them a deep and total blue, blue within blue, with no white left at all, so that to look into the eyes of a Fremen was to see the desert and the spice looking back. Into the world of these people, all unknowing, Paul and his mother had been cast. Two soft outworlders alone in the deep desert, they should by every reasonable measure have died within days, and yet they carried with them things the desert people valued. The boy had the strange sight and the uncanny skills his mother had taught him, and the mother had the deep arts of her sisterhood. And more than this, the two of them fit, without at first understanding how, into the shape of an old and holy expectation the Fremen had carried in their hearts for longer than anyone could remember. For it was among these very people that the ancient seeds of prophecy had been planted long ages before, the belief in a mother of wisdom and a leader who would come to them from the outer world. And now here into their desert had wandered exactly such a pair, a woman of strange powers and a boy of stranger gifts, at the very hour the tribe was watching. And so, out in the deep sand, Paul and Jessica were found. A band of the Fremen, moving through the desert in the ways of their people, came upon the two survivors, and there followed a tense and careful meeting, for the desert people did not lightly take strangers among them, and the ways of the sietch were hard, and the price of trust was high. The Fremen weighed these two outworlders with cool and watchful eyes, testing them, uncertain whether the pair were a burden to be discarded, a danger to be dealt with, or something else entirely, something long awaited. There were among the band those who saw at once the shape of the old prophecy in the arrival of the mother and her son, and others who saw only two soft strangers who would cost the tribe water it could not spare. It was a moment balanced on a knife, for the desert had no room for the useless, and mercy among the Fremen was never simple. But Paul and Jessica proved themselves, each in their own way, worthy of the desert. They showed that they were not the helpless outworlders they appeared, that the boy could hold his own, and the mother could do things that struck deep into the beliefs of the tribe, and slowly, warily, the balance tipped toward acceptance rather than death. The Fremen took the two of them in, drew them down out of the killing openness and into the hidden world of the sietch, and began the long, slow work of turning these survivors of a fallen house into people of the sand. It was a way of life utterly unlike anything Paul and his mother had ever known. Harsher and plainer, and yet richer in its own fierce way. A life measured in water and in loyalty. Bound by ancient custom, lived out in the cool dark beneath the dunes, among a people who trusted slowly and completely. The green ocean world and the noble halls were gone forever, and in their place there was this, the sietch, the still suit, the sacred water, the blue-eyed people of the sand. There is something deeply restful in the thought of that hidden refuge, After so much falling and fleeing, the cool dark caverns beneath the desert where the killing sun cannot reach, the quiet gathered strength of a people who have made a home in the last place anyone thought a home could be. Paul and his mother, who had lost everything and wandered to the very edge of death, had come at last into shelter, taken in by strangers who might in time become their people. The long ordeal of the open sand was behind them, and before them lay a slow initiation into a new and secret world. Let us leave them there in the safety of the Sayach as the desert night settles over the dunes above, the water pools gleaming softly in the dark, the tribe breathing quiet all around them, and let that same shelter and that same quiet gather you in as well, warm and hidden and safe, and carry you gently down into sleep. And so, softly, the desert began to teach him. Paul, who had once been the young heir of a great and gentle world of water, now woke each morning to sand and stone and the deep hush of the hidden caves. And the people of that place, the Fremen, watched him with quiet, careful eyes, and slowly, in their own time, began to let him in. It did not happen quickly, and it was never meant to. Among these desert folk, nothing was given lightly, for they lived where every drop of water was precious and every stranger might be a danger, and so trust had to be earned the slow way, day upon day, small proof after small proof, until at last a newcomer stopped being a guest to be watched and became one of their own. There was a man among them who led the band that had taken Paul and his mother in, a strong and honorable figure named Stilgar, and he stands at the center of this part of the story. Stilgar was a man of the deep desert through and through, weathered and unhurried, hard where hardness was needed, and fair in a way that ran all the way down to the bone. He believed in the old ways of his people, in the sacredness of water and the discipline of survival, and he carried the authority of one who had kept his people alive through more dry years than he could easily count. It was Stilgar who chose to spare the boy and the woman rather than leave them to the sand, and it was Stilgar who took upon himself the slow work of deciding what they might become. He tested Paul without cruelty, but without softness either, watching how he moved, how he listened, whether he complained, whether he could be trusted with the small and enormous responsibilities of desert life. And there was another among them, a young woman with the deep blue eyes that the spice gives to all who live long upon that world, and her name was Chani. Paul knew her face before he ever met her, for she had come to him again and again in the strange dreams that had visited him since before the fall of his house. Dreams of a desert world and a girl who seemed to be waiting for him at the far edge of some future he could not yet reach. And now, here she was, real and unhurried, and entirely herself, no longer a figure of sleep, but a living person who moved across the sand as though she had been born from it. Chani became his guide into the ways of the Fremen, showing him what the desert asked and what it forgave. And in the long unfolding of their days together, she became something far more than a guide. She became the one he loved, and in time, the mother of his heart, the steady center around which the rest of his new life slowly turned. Under her patience and under Stilgar's watchful judgment, Paul learned. He learned to wear the stillsuit as though it were a second skin, that clever garment the Fremen wore against the killing heat, which reclaimed the body's every drop of moisture, so that a person might cross the open sand and lose almost nothing to the burning air. He learned to walk without rhythm across the dunes, in the broken, wandering step the Fremen used, so that the great worms of the deep would not hear the steady drumming of a person moving and come rising up beneath them. He learned the discipline of water, the careful counting of it, the reverence in which his new people held even the smallest measure of moisture, for among the Fremen water was not merely life, but something close to holy. The shared wealth of the whole community, kept and guarded and never wasted. Slowly, all the reflexes of the wet green world he had come from fell away, and the reflexes of the desert took their place. As he earned his footing among them, the Fremen gave him a name, for that was their custom, to name a person for what they truly were rather than for the house they were born into. He took a Fremen name and became one of them in word as well as in deed, and with that naming a great deal of the old weight he carried, the grief of his fallen family and the strangeness of being an outsider began to settle and quiet. He was no longer only the last son of a ruined house. He was becoming a man of the sand, known by the people around him for his own strength and his own steadiness, and there was a kind of healing in that, a slow mending that the desert worked upon him without ever once speaking of it. But there was one trial above all the others that stood between a young man and full acceptance among the Fremen. One great rite that marked the difference between a person who lived in the desert and a true man of the desert. And that was the riding of the sandworm. For the Fremen did not fear the giant worms as outsiders did. They revered them. To them the great creatures were sacred, the makers of the deep, vast beyond reckoning and older than any memory. And to master one, to call it up out of the sand and mount its living back and ride it across the open dunes, was the deepest proof a person could offer that they belonged. It was not a thing done in secret or done by halves. It was done in the open, before the eyes of the people, so that all might see and all might judge. And so the day came when Paul went out onto the great open sand to make his attempt. He carried the tools the Fremen had taught him to use, the hooks and the collars, and he took his place upon the dune and waited for one of the enormous creatures to rise. When it came as such things always came, immense and unhurried and terrible, a mountain of living movement rolling up out of the deep. And Paul did what he had been taught to do, planting his hooks and holding fast and climbing the vast flank of the thing as it moved. There is no soft way to describe how large the worms of Arrakis truly are, for they are among the greatest living things the known universe has ever held. And to stand upon the back of one as it races across the desert is to stand upon a moving hill of the world itself. Yet Paul held on, and he guided it, and he rode it out across the open sand in full view of the watching Fremen, and in doing so he crossed the last threshold that lay between him and them. From that day, he was truly one of them, no longer a stranger they had chosen to spare, but a man of the desert in the fullest sense, proven in the one way that mattered most. Stilgar looked on him now as a brother of the sand, rather than a charge to be tested, and Chani stood beside him, not as a guide leading a newcomer, but as the companion of a man who had earned his place among her people. The grief of everything he had lost had not vanished, for such grief never truly does, but it had found a new home now, folded quietly into a new life, with new bonds and a new belonging. And the boy who had fled into the desert to die had instead been remade there into something the desert could hold. And so, we may let this part of the story settle gently down, like fine sand drifting to rest at the close of a long and windless evening. Picture the young man who has found, in the harshest place in all the empire, a people to belong to and a love to steady him. And let that quiet belonging spread softly through you now. There is no danger in this moment, no hurry, and nothing to keep watch over. Only the deep calm of a desert night and the slow, even breathing of one who has, at last, come home to somewhere. Let your own breathing slow to match it, and let the warmth of that belonging carry you softly down toward rest. Yet, even as Paul settled into his new life among the Fremen, something within him was growing that he could not settle, and it is to that quiet, gathering weight that we turn now, gently, without alarm. For the desert world of Arrakis was steeped in the spice, that strange and precious dust that lay in the very air and the very food and the very breath of the place, and where an ordinary person might live among it and feel only a sharpening of the senses. In Paul, it woke something far deeper and far stranger, a kind of sight that reached beyond the present moment and out across the shape of things to come. He had carried the first hints of this gift since before the fall of his house, in the dreams that had shown him the desert and the girl with the blue eyes before he ever set foot upon the sand. But now, surrounded on every side by the spice, breathing it with every breath, living within it as a fish lives within water, that early flicker of foresight opened into something vast. His visions sharpened and multiplied until he could see not one future, but many, countless possible paths spreading out before him like the branches of some enormous tree, each choice splitting into further choices, each moment blossoming into 1,000 different tomorrows. It was not a clear and simple knowing of what would be. It was a bewildering, shimmering field of what might be, a great trembling web of maybes, and Paul had to learn to move through it without losing himself in its endless turnings. To carry such sight would be a heavy thing for anyone, for there is a kind of peace in not knowing the future, a mercy in being able to meet each day as it comes, without the weight of 1,000 possible outcomes pressing in at once. Paul lost that mercy. Where others saw only the present, he saw the present shot through, with all its possible endings, and he could not always tell which of them would come to pass, only that they gathered and shifted and pressed upon him, waking and sleeping, until the boundary between what was and what might be grew thin and strange. And there was one thing, above all the others, that he saw again and again, on nearly every path his sight could follow, no matter how he turned or which branch he tried to trace. He saw a banner, green and bright, carried forward across the stars. He saw an army, vast beyond counting, fanatical in its devotion, sweeping out from the desert world and across the whole empire in his name. He saw world after world falling before this tide, and he saw slaughter on a scale the mind can barely hold. Billions upon billions caught up in a holy war fought in his name and driven by a faith he had not asked for and could not seem to refuse. It rose before him on almost every path, this green banner and this fanatical host, a war of unimaginable killing carried across the galaxy under the sign of his own legend, and the sight of it filled him with dread. For Paul did not want this. He was not a boy who dreamed of conquest, nor a man who longed to be worshipped. He had lost his father and his home and very nearly his life, and all he truly wanted was to find some quiet way through, some narrow path that might lead to justice for his fallen house without opening the door to that terrible flood. And so he searched. Through all the shimmering branches of his foresight, he searched for a single thread that would let him avoid the holy war, a way to reach the future he wanted without loosing the one he feared. And he looked and looked for that narrow path with the desperate care of a person feeling along a wall in the dark for a door that may not be there at all. Sometimes he thought he glimpsed it, a slender possibility winding between the greater dooms, and he would try to hold it in his mind and steer toward it. But the visions were vast and slippery, and the more clearly he saw the many futures, the more he understood how few of them spared the empire that gathering storm. The green banner waited at the end of nearly every road, and this was perhaps the strangest and heaviest part of his burden, that his very gift, the sight that set him so far above ordinary people, showed him mostly a thing he longed with all his heart to prevent, and could not promise him the power to prevent it. There was a loneliness in this that ran deeper than the loneliness of the desert itself. He could speak of many things with Stilgar and with Chani, could share the daily work and the daily bonds of his new life among the Fremen. But this particular weight he carried mostly alone. The knowledge of the futures pressing in at the edges of his mind even in the quietest moments. He might sit at rest in the hidden caves with the people he had come to love, and even then some part of him would be walking the branching paths, watching the banner rise, counting the possible dead. To see so much was to be, in a strange and sorrowful way, always a little apart from those who saw only the present hour. And there was a further trouble hidden inside the gift, subtle and hard to name. The more a person could see of the futures, the more the very act of seeing began to shape them. For to know a thing was coming was to be drawn, in 1,000 small ways, toward the choices that brought it near. Paul came to understand that his own foresight was not a window through which he watched from a safe distance, but a thread woven into the very cloth it showed him, so that in looking toward the green banner he risked stepping, all unwilling, a little closer to it. This was perhaps the deepest snare of all, that the sight he hoped would help him escape the war might itself be one of the quiet forces carrying him toward it. And he turned that riddle over and over in the long desert nights without ever quite untangling it. And yet there was a discipline in it, too, hard-won and slowly earned. Paul had been trained from childhood by his Bene Gesserit mother in the deep arts of the mind, in stillness and in control, in the mastery of fear and the steadying of the self. And those long teachings served him now. He learned, little by little, not to be swept away by the flood of futures, not to drown in the shimmering branches, but to stand within the current of his own foresight and look upon it with a measure of calm. He could not stop the visions, and he could not always change what they showed, but he could learn to carry them, to hold the great weight of them without breaking, and there was a quiet strength in that carrying that would matter greatly in the days to come. So we find him at this turning, a young man rich in a gift that most would envy, and that he himself had come to half dread, seeing further than any person around him, and wishing, more than anything, that he could see a little less. The desert had given him belonging and love, and a place among a proud people, and it had also given him this, the terrible clarity of the spice, the branching futures, the green banner rising again and again at the far edge of nearly every road. But let us not carry that weight with us as we settle now toward rest. Let us instead set it gently down, the way Paul himself learned to set down the flood of his own visions, and let the great tangle of possible tomorrows fade softly into the dark. There is no future for you to see tonight, and no path for you to search out. Nothing to trace and nothing to prevent, only this single quiet moment, warm and still and entirely enough. Let the branching paths blur and dim. Let the shimmering possibilities drift away like sand on a slow night wind. And let yourself rest here in the one gentle present that asks nothing of you at all, softly, easily, all the way down towards sleep. There came a time when Paul, weighed down by all that his sight could and could not show him, sought a way to see further still, to reach the futures that lay hidden even from him. And to do that, he turned toward the deepest and most dangerous rite the Fremen knew. To understand it, we must first understand a belief the desert people had carried for a very long time, a belief woven into the oldest layers of their faith, concerning a substance they called the water of life, and a figure they called the Lisan al-Gaib. The water of life was no gentle thing. It was a poison, drawn in a strange and solemn way from the body of a sandworm that had been drowned. For water was death to the great creatures of the deep. And when one of the smaller worms was taken and given to the water, it released a bitter liquid that was deadly to almost every living soul who drank it. And yet the Fremen believed, and had believed for generations, that a true leader, the one their old prophecies named the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world, would be able to take this deadly poison into himself and not die of it, but instead transform it, changing the killing thing into something that opened the mind and the sight. To survive the water of life was, in their belief, the proof beyond all proofs. The one thing an ordinary person could never do, and a true prophet could. The Fremen had holy women among them who worked with the water of life in their own way, reverend mothers who could take the transformed substance and carry within themselves the memories of all the mothers who had come before, a vast inner sea of the past. But no man had ever survived the raw poison, for the place within the mind that a woman could turn toward it, a man could not. And so the drinking of the water of life by any man had always ended in death. This was the wall against which the old prophecy pressed, the impossible test that only the promised one could pass. And Paul, seeking the paths that lay beyond his reach, seeking a way to see through the terrible tangle of futures to some hidden thread that might yet save the empire from the war he dreaded, chose to drink it. It was an act of desperate courage and desperate need, for he understood well that it might simply kill him, that he might be no different from all the men who had tried and failed before. But his foresight had brought him to a place where the ordinary limits of his sight were no longer enough, where he felt certain that only by facing this deepest danger could he find what he was searching for. And so he took the water of life into himself and let it do its work. He fell as though dead. His body went still and cold and unmoving, and to those who watched over him, it seemed for a long and terrible while that he had crossed over and would not return, that he had made the attempt and failed as all the others had failed. Days passed while he lay in that death-like stillness, and there was great grief and great fear among those who loved him, for it seemed the poison had taken him after all. Chani watched over him through that long silence, and she it was who, at the last, found the way to call him back, wetting his lips with a trace of the very substance that had felled him, so that the transformation might at last complete itself within him rather than destroy him. And then he woke, but he woke changed, wholly and forever changed, for the water of life had not killed him. It had done in him what the Fremen prophecy had promised the true one would do. He had taken the poison and transformed it, and in the transforming his sight had opened as it had never opened before. Where once he had seen only the branching futures spreading out ahead, now his vision reached in every direction at once, backward into the deep past as well as forward into the times to come, so that he could see across the whole span of things, the long chain of what had been, and the great tree of what might be, all held together in a single, overwhelming clarity. He had passed through the death-like sleep and come out the other side as something the desert had waited many long ages to see. There is a quiet wonder in imagining that awakening, the way a person might surface from the deepest sleep of their life, carrying knowledge they did not have before. The whole of the past suddenly present to them, and the whole of the future spread out like a landscape seen from a great height. It was a fearful gift and a heavy one, but it was also the answer to the searching that had driven him to the water of life in the first place. For now he could reach the hidden places his sight had never touched, and see, at last, some of what had lain beyond his reach. And there was another thread woven into the story of the water of life, one just as strange and just as tender. For Paul's mother, the Lady Jessica, had also come to drink it, taking the same deadly poison into herself in order to become a reverend mother among the Fremen, to hold within her the long inner sea of ancestral memory that such women carried. But Jessica drank the water of life while she was carrying a child, a daughter, not yet born, still growing in the quiet dark within her. And the transformation that opened Jessica's own mind reached also into the unborn child, waking her too, far too soon, so that the little one within the womb was stirred into full awareness before she had ever drawn a breath of the open air. That daughter would be named Aaliyah, and she came into awareness in the strangest way any child ever has, awake and knowing within her mother's body, sharing in the flood of ancestral memory that the water of life had loosed, a mind fully formed before a life had properly begun. It was a thing without precedent, a child touched by the deepest mysteries of the Fremen before her birth, and it marked her, as it marked her brother, as one of the strange new beings that the desert and the spice and the water of life were bringing into the world. Brother and sister alike now carried gifts and burdens far beyond the ordinary span of human life, shaped by the same dark and transforming water. It is worth pausing gently on how uncanny a thing this truly was. For the Bene Gesserit themselves, the ancient sisterhood who had spent thousands of years cultivating the deep arts of mind and memory, held such a stirring of an unborn child in a kind of dread, sensing something perilous in a life awakened before its time. Yet there was no undoing it now. The little one who would be Aaliyah had woken into the whole long inner sea of the mothers who came before her, generation upon generation, all their memories flowing into a mind that had not yet seen daylight, and she would carry that vast and ancient inheritance into a childhood that could never be entirely ordinary. In this the family had crossed, without quite meaning to, into wholly uncharted country, where the old rules of what a child could be and what a mind could hold no longer plainly applied. So the family that had fled into the desert to die had instead been changed by it in ways no one could have foreseen. The son awakened to sight across all of time. The unborn daughter awakened within the womb. The mother risen to the deep memory of the reverend mothers. The desert had taken almost everything from them and had given them, in return, powers strange and vast and not entirely easy to hold. But let us set those great mysteries down now, gently, and let the strangeness of them soften into something restful. There is no poison for you to face tonight, and no death-like sleep to pass through. Only the ordinary, kindly sleep that comes softly on its own and asks nothing terrible of anyone. Let the thought of that long stillness settle into your own drifting calm, the deep quiet of a body at rest and a mind letting go, and let it carry you, warm and unhurried and safe, down and down toward the gentle dark of sleep. Now we come to the part of the story where a young man of a fallen house became, in the eyes of a whole people, the prophet they had waited long ages to see. And to understand how that happened, we must hold two things together at once, gently, for both were true, and it was in their joining that the legend of Muad'Dib was born. The first thing was the old prophecy itself. Long before Paul ever set foot upon the desert world, the Fremen had carried within their faith the belief that one day a figure would come to them from the outer world, a voice from beyond the sands, a leader who would deliver them and lead them to a green and gentle future. They spoke of the Lisan al-Ghaib, the voice from the outer world, and of a mother and her son who would arrive from beyond the desert bearing the signs of the Promised One. This belief was old and deep and woven all through their ways, and yet it had not grown among them entirely on its own. Long ago, the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, the quiet order of women who worked behind the thrones of the empire, had scattered seeds of such prophecies across many far worlds, planting legends that a member of their order might one day use for shelter or for power. The Fremen faith in a coming Messiah was, in part, one of those long-planted seeds, waiting across the centuries for someone to fulfill it. The second thing was Paul himself, and everything the desert had truly made of him. For he was not merely a stranger who happened to fit an old and convenient story. He had ridden the great worm and earned his place among the Fremen. He had come through the death-like sleep of the water of life and survived what no man before him had survived. His sight reached across the past and the future both, and his mother had risen to the deep memory of the Reverend Mothers, while his unborn sister woke within the womb. These were not planted legends, but real and growing powers, strange gifts born of the spice and the desert and the discipline of his own trained mind. And so the old planted prophecy and the real, living powers came together and fused into one, and the fusing was seamless, for each seemed to confirm the other. The Fremen had been told that a voice from the outer world would come bearing such signs, and here was a young man from beyond the desert who bore them in truth, who did the very things the legend had promised the true one would do. To the desert people it was not a trick, and it was not a coincidence. It was the fulfillment of everything they had believed, arriving at last in flesh and blood, and their faith in him grew swiftly and fervently, spreading from Sietch to hidden Sietch across the great desert. They gave him a name that would carry across the stars. Among the Fremen, he had already taken a desert name when he first earned his place. But now he took another, a name of deeper meaning, and he became Muad'Dib. It was the name the Fremen gave to a small desert creature, a little mouse of the sands that they admired for its cleverness and its ability to live where nothing else could. A creature woven into their own lore of survival. And it was more than a name for an animal, for it pointed also to the light of a certain constellation in the desert night, so that to be called Muad'Dib was to be tied to the wisdom of survival and to the guiding lights of the sky, both at once. Paul took this name and made it his own, and as Muad'Dib his legend began truly to swell. Word of him moved through the desert the way water moves through dry ground, swiftly and eagerly and reaching everywhere. In Sietch after Sietch, the Fremen spoke of the one who had come to them from the outer world, the voice long promised, the survivor of the deadly water, the rider of the great worm who could see across time. A fervor gathered around him, a devotion that grew warmer and fiercer with every telling, until he was no longer simply a respected man of the desert, but a figure of faith, a promised deliverer in whom a whole people had begun to place the weight of their oldest hopes. The love his people bore him was real, and the hope was real, and there was a great and gathering power in it, the power of an entire faith turning toward a single living person. And here the story holds a quiet sorrow at its heart, for Paul did not receive this rising legend with an easy joy. He understood, better than anyone, how much of the prophecy had been planted rather than born. How the sisterhood's old seeds had prepared the ground for exactly this. And more than that, he remembered the futures his sight had shown him, the green banner and the fanatical army and the holy war sweeping across the stars in his name, the very catastrophe he had searched so long to avoid. He could see, with the terrible clarity of his opened vision, that this swelling faith was the beginning of that very thing, that the fervor gathering around the name of Muad'Dib was the first stirring of the flood he dreaded most. He was becoming, step by step, the figure he had feared to be. There was a deep unease in him, then, even as the desert people lifted him up. He had wanted a narrow path, a way to win justice for his fallen house without loosing the war, and instead he found himself standing at the very center of a rising religious fervor that seemed to bend, whatever he did, toward the future he most wished to prevent. To be worshipped is a strange and lonely thing in any case, but to be worshipped while seeing clearly where the worship might lead, and to be unable to turn it aside, was a burden heavier still. He accepted the name and the role, because the moment and the people and the shape of things pressed him toward it, and because through it lay whatever hope remained of justice and survival. But he accepted it with open eyes and a heavy heart, knowing what it might become. And yet, seen from the outside, from the eyes of the Fremen who loved him, it was a time of great and rising hope. For a people long despised by the wider empire, dismissed as savages, ground down for generations, here at last was the one their faith had promised, a leader in whom the old dream of a green world and a free people seemed suddenly possible. Their fervor was not madness, but hope long deferred finding at last a place to rest. And around the figure of Muad'Dib, that hope grew into something vast and warm and fierce. It is a tender and a complicated thing, this meeting of a people's true longing with a legend that had partly been planted for other ends, and the story does not ask us to judge it harshly. The Fremen were not fools, and their hope was not empty, for the man they lifted up did in truth carry powers beyond the ordinary, and did in truth mean to free them from the cruelty that had ground them down. What made it heavy was only that Paul could see further than they could see where such a rising faith so often leads, and so he stood among them carrying both their hope and his own foreknowledge at once, smiling upon their joy, while quietly grieving the shape of what it might become. Few burdens are stranger than to be the answer to another's prayer, and to fear, in the same breath, the very thing that answer might unleash. So we hold the two truths together and let them settle, the planted legend and the living power, fused now into a single prophet standing at the center of a whole people's faith. And we let the fervor and the unease alike soften into the calm of the ending night. There is nothing here for you to carry, and no role for you to take up. No legend gathering around your own quiet resting place. Only the gentle dark and the slow, easy rhythm of your own breathing. Let the great swelling story fade to a distant murmur, warm and far away, and let yourself drift softly down, unburdened and untroubled, all the way towards sleep. With the faith of the Fremen gathered around him and the name of Muad'Dib carried from sietch to sietch across the desert, Paul turned that gathering devotion toward a purpose, and the purpose was war against the cruel house that had destroyed his own. This is the part of the story where the despised desert people, so long dismissed by the wider empire as little more than savages, rose up and showed the whole known universe what they truly were. And we may tell it softly, as a slow tide turning rather than as a storm, letting even the fighting settle into the calm of a tale told at the end of a long day. For a long time the desert world of Arrakis had been held by the brutal House Harkonnen, the wealthy and monstrous enemies of Paul's fallen family, who had grown rich for generations by stripping the planet of its precious spice. After the fall of House Atreides, the Harkonnens had returned to their old mastery over the world, and to rule the desert in their name, the monstrous Baron set his nephew, the cruel and heavy-handed Rabban, a man who governed through fear and force and the grinding down of the people beneath him. Rabban squeezed the desert world hard, driving the spice harvest ever forward, careless of the Fremen he trampled, believing them too scattered and too weak to be any real threat to his power. But he did not understand the people of the sand, and he did not understand what had risen among them. Paul, as Muad'Dib, had done what no outsider had ever done. He had taken the many scattered tribes of the desert, the separate bands who lived in their hidden caves across the vast dry world, and he had begun to draw them together into a single force, unified in faith and unified in purpose. A great host bound by their devotion to him and by their long-held hunger for freedom. The Fremen, had always been fierce fighters, hardened by a life in the harshest place in all the empire, but scattered, they had been only a nuisance to their rulers. Gathered and disciplined and given a single aim, they became something else entirely. A fighting force unlike any the empire had ever faced. And Paul understood, with the clarity of his open sight, exactly where to strike. He did not waste the strength of his people in open battles against fortified strongholds. He struck instead at the one thing the whole empire could not do without, the spice itself. For the spice of Arrakis was not merely a treasure, it was the substance that let the great ships of the Spacing Guild cross the void between the stars. The substance that extended life and sharpened minds across 1,000 worlds. The single thread on which the whole vast web of the empire hung. Whoever disrupted the flow of the spice held a knife against the throat of civilization itself, and Paul knew it. And so the Fremen, striking out of the deep desert where no outsider could follow, fell upon the spice harvest again and again, raiding and burning and vanishing back into the sand before any answer could reach them. The Harkonnens found themselves fighting an enemy they could not catch. The Fremen moved across the open desert as no soldier of the empire could, riding the great worms out of the deep, appearing where they were least expected and melting away into the trackless dunes. They knew every hidden path and every secret place. They needed almost nothing to survive where others would perish in a day, and they fought with a discipline and a devotion that made them terrible beyond reckoning. Rabban, for all his cruelty and all his force, could not hold the world against them. The spice harvest faltered. The Harkonnen losses mounted. Harvester after harvester lost. Garrison after garrison bled, until the heavy-handed nephew, who had thought the Fremen beneath his notice, found his grip on the desert world slipping steadily away. Slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. The people who had been ground down for generations rose up and drove their oppressors back, and the brutal Rabban, unable to master the storm gathering against him, at last fell before it. His rule broken, his forces shattered, his cruelty answered at last by the very people he had thought too weak to matter. And as the Harkonnen hold on Arrakis crumbled, the truth of the Fremen became plain to all who watched from the wider empire. These were not savages. These were, quite simply, the deadliest soldiers in the known universe, forged by the harshest world and all the stars into fighters that no ordinary army could stand against. This was a thing the great powers of the empire had never reckoned with. For a very long time the Fremen had been overlooked, counted as a scattered and backward people of no real consequence, their numbers unknown and their strength unmeasured. Now, gathered under Muad'Dib and striking at the very heart of the empire's lifeblood, they proved that all that easy contempt had been a grave and blinding mistake. World upon world depended on the spice, and the spice now lay in the hands of a desert people who could choke off its flow whenever they chose, led by a young man who could see the shape of things to come. There is a quiet justice in this turning that is worth resting upon for a moment. The Harkonnens had ruled the desert world through fear, taking its wealth and spending its people carelessly, certain that force alone was enough to hold what they had seized. But force alone had never truly understood the sand, nor the patience of those who lived upon it, nor the deep endurance of a people who had learned to want little and to lose nothing. When at last that patience gathered itself and rose, it revealed a strength that all the wealth and all the harshness of the Harkonnens could not match. And the mighty found themselves undone by the very people they had thought too small to fear. It is an old lesson, told again here upon the dunes, that those who are overlooked are not always weak, and that contempt is a poor and blinding guide. The disruption reached far beyond the desert world. As the spice faltered, alarm spread through the highest halls of the empire, for the loss of the spice threatened everyone, the great houses and the guild and the throne alike. A rebellion on a single distant world was one thing, a matter that might be left to the local rulers to settle. But a threat to the spice was a threat to the whole order of the stars, and it could not be ignored, and it could not be left to a broken and failing house to answer. The trouble on Arrakis had grown too great, the losses too heavy, the danger too near the heart of everything, and the powers of the empire could no longer stand aside and let it run. And so the pressure mounted, higher and higher, until it reached the very summit of the empire, until the one figure who sat above all the great houses could no longer leave the matter to others. The desert world had drawn to itself a crisis that only the highest power could hope to settle, and the emperor himself, the distant ruler of the whole vast realm, was at last compelled to turn his full attention toward that single dry planet, and to come to it in person, bringing the weight of his own dread might to bear upon the storm that Muad'Dib and his desert legions had raised. The despised people of the sand had, in the end, forced the master of the known universe to come to them. But let us not follow that gathering weight any further tonight. Let us instead let the great turning tide grow quiet and slow, the way the desert itself grows still when the last light fades and the cool of the night settles over the dunes. Picture the vast sands falling silent after a long day, the fighting done, the storm spent, the whole wide world sinking into a deep and windless calm. There is nothing here for you to win, and no battle for you to keep watch over, only the soft and steady dark and the slow rhythm of your own untroubled breath. Let the great desert grow still around you, and let that stillness spread gently through you now, carrying you softly and easily down toward sleep. And so we come at last to the moment toward which the whole long story has been quietly leaning, the hour when the powers of the empire gather in one place upon the sand, and the boy who fell into the desert to die stands ready to answer everything that was done to his house. The emperor himself has come to Arrakis, brought down from his throne among the stars by the strange and stubborn refusal of the spice to keep flowing. And he does not come alone. His great ships settle upon the desert floor near the city of Arrakis, and from them pour the Sardaukar, the emperor's own soldiers, the most feared fighters in all the known worlds, raised on a cruel prison planet and hardened into something colder than ordinary men. With them come the Harkonnens, the old enemies of the Atreides, gathered once more to finish what they believed they had already finished on that terrible night of betrayal. The desert holds them all now, the emperor and his household, the baron and his kin, ringed by their machines and their banners, waiting behind the shelter of the great stone barrier that guards the lowland city, the wall that has always broken the worst of the storms and kept the deep desert at a distance. It is a strange thing to picture, this vast gathering of might, so certain of itself, so accustomed to winning, and to know that all of it is about to be undone by the very land it has always despised. For the desert is not empty, and it never was. Out beyond the wall, hidden in the folds of the dunes and the shadowed high country, the Fremen wait, tens of thousands of them, the people the empire had dismissed for generations as scattered savages fit only to be counted and forgotten. They wait with a patience the outsiders could not imagine, and they wait behind a young man they have come to call Muad'Dib, the one their oldest legends promised, the voice from the outer world. He has spent his years among them, learning their silence, their discipline, their absolute mastery of the sand, and now he means to spend all of it at once. The storm comes first, a great wall of wind and dust rolling in off the deep desert. The kind of storm whose fury can strip the flesh from bone and blind every eye and every machine that tries to look through it. To the gathered armies, it is only weather, a hazard to be sheltered from, and they draw back behind their defenses and trust the ancient wall to hold. But the storm is Paul's ally, chosen and awaited, and under its cover, the Fremen move. And with the storm comes the sound the desert people have learned to read like a heartbeat, the deep shuddering approach of the sandworms, the giant creatures that rule the dunes, called up out of the depths and ridden now by riders who have earned the right to command them. To break the wall that has stood against every storm, Paul turns to the one weapon his family had kept hidden and never used, the old atomic stockpile passed down through the generations of his house, and with it, he opens the Great Barrier, splitting the stone so that the storm and the worms and the desert itself pour through the gap all at once. What follows is less a battle than a reckoning. The Sardaukar, who had never truly been beaten, who had spread terror across 1,000 worlds simply by arriving, meet the Fremen at last on open ground, and they find that here, on this dry and pitiless plain, they are not the deadliest thing in the world. The desert people come out of the dust like something the sand itself has dreamed, fearless in a way that cannot be trained or bought, fighting for their home and their profit with a fervor the Emperor's men have no answer for. The great worms move among the broken defenses, vast and unstoppable, and the ordered ranks of the Empire dissolve into confusion and terror. The Harkonnen forces, who had grown fat and cruel on the spice for so long, break and fall, and the Sardaukar, for all their fearsome name, are overwhelmed and scattered, until the field belongs entirely to the ragged desert folk everyone had counted as nothing. Within the chaos, the old cruelty of the Baron meets its end as well, and the long hatred that had waited generations for its moment finds that its moment has finally passed. The Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who had schemed and gorged and gloated his way through the ruin of House Atreides, falls at last upon the sand he had bled for decades, undone within the very hour of his supposed triumph. And when the dust begins to settle and the wind begins to ease, the Emperor of the known universe, the distant power who had signed away a noble house to satisfy his own quiet fear, sits captured in his own ruined shelter, his soldiers broken around him, waiting to see what the young man of the desert will do with him. Yet there is one matter still unsettled, one thread of the old feud not yet cut, and it belongs to Feyd-Rautha, the younger of the Baron's heirs, the cold and clever one, groomed all his life to be a champion and hungry to prove it. And so, the ending narrows from the sweep of armies down to a single, quiet circle. Two young men facing each other with blades, one raised in the pampered brutality of a poisoned house, the other tempered by loss and the desert and years of terrible foresight. It is a hard and close thing, this last duel, and Paul takes a wound in it, and for a breath the whole future seems to hang upon the edge of a knife. But it is Paul who rises when it is finished, and with the fall of Feyd-Rautha, the last living blade of the Harkonnens is laid down, and the ancient enmity between the two houses ends there upon the sand, in silence, with the desert wind moving softly over it all. Now, everything belongs to Paul, and the great powers of the Empire understand it at once. He holds the Emperor captive and the houses helpless, and above all he holds the one thing none of them can live without. For he has made plain that the spice, the precious dust that lets the great ships cross the dark between the stars and keeps the whole civilization breathing, lies entirely within his reach, and that he is willing, if they force him, to end it forever, to destroy the source of it, and let the Empire fall silent and still, its ships stranded, its worlds cut off from one another in the endless dark. It is a threat so total that no army could ever match it, and standing there wounded upon the field. The fugitive boy who had nothing left but sand becomes, in a single afternoon, the master of them all. And so, with the emperor kneeling in defeat and the shattered houses gathered helpless before him, Paul claims what the old order can no longer deny him. He takes the throne of the known universe for himself. And to bind his claim past challenge, he sets his hand upon the future by asking for the hand of the emperor's eldest daughter, the princess of the old line, so that his rule might be sealed not only by conquest, but by the quiet arithmetic of dynasty. The great houses bow, some in fear and some in fury, and the long day upon the sand comes to its close, with the whole shape of power turned entirely around. For now, let all of that vast and violent history settle gently, the storm gone quiet, the worms sunk back into the deep, the armies still, and the desert cooling under the first stars of the evening. The great turning is done, and there is nothing left tonight but the slow hush of the sand and the soft, even rhythm of your own breathing, carrying you a little further down toward rest. When the dust has truly settled and the great day of the sand has passed into memory, it is worth pausing, softly and without hurry, to look out over the whole of the known universe as it now stands, and to feel how completely the shape of everything has changed. For an empire that had turned for many thousands of years in one steady pattern has been lifted up and set down again, facing an entirely new direction. And at the center of it, where once there sat a distant emperor upon a far and glittering throne, there now sits a young man raised in a green ocean world and remade in the desert. The first ruler in all the long history of the empire to hold the throne from the dry planet of Arrakis itself. Paul Atreides, whom the desert people call Muad'Dib, sits now upon the golden lion throne, the seat of the Padishah emperors, the highest place in all the inhabited worlds. It is a strange and almost dreamlike thing to hold in the mind, that the fugitive boy who fled into the deep sand with nothing but his mother and the clothes he wore should now command the loyalty, or at least the obedience, of countless planets scattered across the immensity of space. He rules not from a palace among the stars, but from the very world everyone had once thought of as a wasteland, the barren place of heat and thirst and endless dunes. And in doing so, he has turned the whole understanding of the empire upon its head. The center of everything is no longer some gilded capital world. The center of everything is the desert, because the desert holds the spice, and Paul now holds the desert. And this is the true root of his power, the thing that makes his rule unlike any that came before it. The spice, the precious dust called melange, found nowhere else in all the worlds, remains the one substance the whole civilization cannot do without. It is what lets the great ships of the Spacing Guild fold the distance between the stars and travel safely through the dark. And without it, the empire would come apart into countless isolated worlds, each one stranded and alone. For as long as anyone can remember, whoever held the spice held a great share of power, but no one had ever held all of it, and no one had ever been willing to threaten the source itself. Paul has done both. He has shown that he can end the spice forever if he chooses, and so he holds the whole of the empire the way a man might hold a single fragile thing in his open hand. And every great power in the known worlds understands that the hand could close. The old emperor, Shaddam IV, who had ruled with such certainty and had feared the rising Atreides enough to arrange their ruin, is emperor no longer. He is sent away into exile, stripped of the throne he had held for so long, carried off to spend his remaining years far from the seat of power he once thought was his, by unquestioned right. The dread Sardaukar, his terrible soldiers, who had made whole worlds tremble merely by their reputation, are broken and diminished, their legend undone in a single afternoon upon the sand, their myth of invincibility gone. And the great houses of the empire, the proud feudal families of the Landsraad, who had spent their long lives measuring one another and jockeying for advantage, find themselves suddenly forced to kneel before a power they never saw coming, a power born from the very people they had all agreed to ignore. For that is perhaps the most astonishing part of this new arrangement of the worlds, and the part most worth resting the mind upon gently. The Fremen, the hardy blue-eyed people of the desert, whom the whole empire had dismissed for generations as scattered savages, as a nuisance to be counted and taxed and otherwise forgotten, have risen from the very bottom of everything to become the masters of the galaxy. The people who lived hidden in caves beneath the sand, who saved every drop of their own water and buried their dead for the moisture they carried, who were hunted and underestimated and thought to be no threat at all, are now the fiercest fighting force in the known universe and the truest strength behind the new emperor's throne. It is as though the desert itself had risen up and taken the crown, and the great and comfortable powers of the empire must now learn to bow to the very sand they had always looked past. It is a reversal so complete, so far beyond anything the careful planners of the empire had ever allowed themselves to fear, that many of them can scarcely take it in even now, staring at the new order of things the way a sleeper stares at a strange room in the first moments of waking, half believing it must dissolve if only they wait long enough. But it does not dissolve. The desert people are truly risen, and the world has truly turned, and no amount of quiet disbelief among the fallen mighty will set it back the way it was. And yet, for all the completeness of this victory, there is something in the air of it that does not feel like an ending, something brittle and uneasy beneath the surface of the triumph. The peace that has settled over the worlds is not the deep and restful peace of a story truly finished. It is more like the strange stillness that comes over the desert just before the great storm arrives, when the light goes flat and the wind holds its breath and everything waits. The houses have knelt, but many of them have knelt in fury rather than acceptance, their pride wounded, their old certainties overturned, and behind their careful silence there is resentment and calculation, and the slow, patient work of those who intend to endure and to wait for their moment. The great institutions that had shaped the empire for thousands of years, the Spacing Guild and the Ancient Sisterhood and the other quiet powers, have all been forced to yield to Paul's grip upon the spice, and none of them are the sort to yield forever without seeking some way to loosen his hold. So, the empire is at peace, and the empire is not at rest. Paul sits upon the highest throne in all the worlds, holding more power than any single person has ever held before. And the very completeness of that power makes him something new and something frightening, even to those who serve him. A ruler who can end the lifeblood of civilization with a word is a ruler no one can truly oppose in the open, and yet a ruler no one can ever quite stop watching from the shadows. The victory upon the sand has closed one long chapter of the story, the chapter of the fall and the flight and the desert and the rising, and it has opened another that no one, not even Paul himself, can yet see the shape of fully, though he has spent years dreading the outline of it. For tonight, though, there is no need to press forward into any of that. It is enough simply to hold the picture of it in the mind, softly and without effort, the strange new order of the worlds hanging in a delicate and watchful balance. Picture the desert planet at the center of everything now, its dunes stretching away beneath a sky full of stars, and upon it a young man who was once a hunted fugitive, now the master of all he can see and all he cannot. Picture the great houses bowing across the distant worlds, and the desert people risen at last into the light, and the whole vast machinery of the empire turning quietly around a single grain of precious dust. Let the enormity of it grow soft and distant, the way a great landscape softens as evening comes on, until the details blur and the whole thing becomes only a warm and faraway glow. There is nothing here you need to carry, and nothing here you need to hold. Let the picture drift, and let yourself drift a little with it, down and down toward the deep still quiet of sleep. Beneath the great and dazzling fact of the throne, beneath the bowed houses and the broken armies and the vast reach of the new emperor's power, there is a smaller and quieter story, and it is in many ways the truest one, the one that aches the most gently and lingers the longest. It is the story of the heart of the man who won everything, and of how, in the very winning of it, he came to lose the one thing he had wanted most to keep. For power on such a scale does not come freely, and Paul Atreides pays for his crown in a coin that no throne can ever repay. The coin of the ordinary human life he might have had, the warmth and the closeness, and the simple belonging that the desert had once, briefly, given him. At the center of that cost stands Chani, the young Fremen woman who had walked out of Paul's earliest dreams and into his waking life, who had been his guide through the strange ways of the desert and his companion through the hardest years of his becoming. She is the one he truly loves, the woman of the sand, who knew him not as a prophet or an emperor, but simply as the young man he was before all the great titles gathered upon him. She is the mother of his heart, and in time, the mother of his children, the person who had stood beside him when he had nothing at all, when he was only a fugitive learning to survive one more night beneath the vast desert sky. In a gentler story, she would be his wife before all the worlds, seated at his side in the full light of his victory, sharing openly in everything he had won. But the throne does not allow such gentleness, and here is where the quiet ache begins. To hold the empire, Paul cannot simply be a man who loves a woman of the desert. He must be a figure larger than any single life, a living legend, a ruler whom whole worlds worship and fear. And something in that transformation opens a distance between him and Chani that neither of them chose and neither of them can quite close. He has become a living god in the eyes of countless people, and it is a lonely thing to be a god. For the awe that surrounds such a figure keeps everyone, even the most beloved, at a certain unbridgeable remove. Chani stands beside him still, faithful and clear-eyed and strong, but she stands now beside a man who has been lifted so high and so far from ordinary life that even her nearness cannot fully reach him. The love between them endures, but it endures under a shadow, weighed down by everything the crown demands. And into that already tender wound comes another figure, one who complicates the picture further and deepens the quiet sorrow at its center. Her name is Irulan, and she is the eldest daughter of the fallen emperor, the princess of the old imperial line, raised in the highest circles of power and trained in patience and observation and the long, careful art of survival among the great. When Paul seized the throne, he bound his claim to it by taking Irulan as his wife. For a marriage to the daughter of the old emperor gives his rule the weight of continuity, a bridge from the old order to the new, a way to make the great houses accept what conquest alone might not have made them swallow. It is a union of pure calculation, a matter of thrones and bloodlines and the cold arithmetic of legitimacy, and there is no love in it at all, not on his side and not truly on hers. So the strange and painful arrangement takes its shape. Irulan is the wife, the empress in name, the one whose title seals the throne, and whose presence satisfies the demands of dynasty and politics. And Chani is the beloved, the one who holds Paul's heart and bears the children of his blood, but who holds no crown and no formal place, standing in the truth of his affection, while another woman stands in the form of his marriage. It is an inversion of everything a simple heart would wish for. The woman he loves without the title, and the woman with the title he does not love, and both of them caught in a situation that none of them can easily change, bound together by the machinery of empire into a knot of quiet unhappiness. For Irulan, there is a particular kind of loneliness in this, the loneliness of a wife who is a wife in name only, seated near the summit of all power, and yet shut out from the warmth at its center, watching the man whose name she shares turn always toward another. She is intelligent and proud and far from powerless, and she does not accept her hollow position with simple resignation. Somewhere in her there gathers the slow, patient hope of a woman who means, in time, to make her place real, to become more than a symbol, to find some way to matter in the life of the man and the empire she has been married into. That hope, held quietly and nursed over long years, will come to shape a great deal of what follows, though for now it lies still beneath the surface. Another small hidden thing in a court full of hidden things. And for Paul, at the very center of it all, there is the deepest ache of the three, the strange, hollow sorrow of a man who has won everything the universe has to offer, and found that it does not fill him. He set out with no ambition to rule the stars. He was driven into the desert by tragedy, remade by hardship, carried upward by forces and prophecies larger than himself, and he arrives at the summit of all human power to discover that the climb has cost him the very things that made any of it worth wanting. He has the throne, and he has lost the ease of loving freely. He has the worship of countless worlds, and he has lost the simple closeness he once knew in a cave beneath the sand. He is surrounded by more people than any ruler in history, and he is more alone than he has ever been. The victory that looks so total from the outside feels, from within, like a kind of exile, a golden distance set between him and every warm and human thing. This is the true weight at the heart of the story now, heavier in its own quiet way than any army or any throne. It is the ancient and tender truth that the getting of a great thing and the keeping of a good life are not the same, and that a person can gain the whole of the world and still lie awake at the center of it, missing what cannot be bought back. Paul Atreides has become the most powerful being in the known universe, and he would trade a great deal of that power, if he only could, for the plain untroubled life he glimpsed for a little while in the desert, before the legend closed over him and carried him away. Let that gentle sadness rest lightly upon you now, the way the memory of a bittersweet thing settles in the evening, tender but not sharp, sorrowful but strangely peaceful. There is a soft mercy even in this ache, the mercy of understanding, of seeing clearly that no crown is worth more than a kind and quiet life, and of being glad in the warm safety of your own resting place, for the simple gentle things close at hand. Let the great lonely throne and the two women and the sorrowing God upon it grow soft and dim and far away, and let your own breath grow slow and even, carrying you down, past all that grandeur and all that sorrow, into the deep and gentle quiet of rest. There is one more shadow to speak of before the story of the conquest is fully told, the largest shadow of them all, and it is the one that Paul Atreides had seen coming from very far away and had dreaded above every other thing. For all through his years in the desert, whenever his strange foresight opened the branching paths of the future before him, there was one shape that appeared again and again, on almost every road, no matter which way he turned. It was the shape of a holy war, a great and terrible surge of faith carrying his name across the stars, world after world swept up in fervor and fire, and countless lives ending in the name of the very man who wished more than anything to prevent it. This is the jihad, and it is the true and darkest fruit of everything that came before. To understand how it came to pass, it helps to remember the strange fuel that had been laid down long ago, quietly and deliberately, in the deep beliefs of the desert people. The ancient sisterhood, working across thousands of years, had seeded worlds like Arrakis with the seeds of prophecy, planting among the Fremen the expectation of a coming savior, a voice from the outer world who would lead them and change everything. When Paul arrived, a stranger from beyond the sand with real and growing powers of foresight and command, that old planted prophecy and his true abilities fused together into something enormous. The Fremen came to see him not merely as a leader, but as their long-promised Messiah. And the devotion that gathered around him was not the ordinary loyalty a soldier gives a general, but the blazing, boundless faith a believer gives a God. That faith was a fire, and once it was lit, it could not simply be put out. And so, when Paul took the throne and became emperor of the known universe, the fire did not stay upon Arrakis. The Fremen legions, who had proven themselves the fiercest fighters in all the worlds, poured off the desert planet and out into the empire, carrying their prophet's name like a banner and their prophet's cause like a holy duty. They went forth not merely to conquer, but to convert, to bring the whole of the human worlds under the sway of Muad'Dib. And they went with a fervor so total, so certain of its own righteousness, that ordinary resistance simply melted before it. World after world fell to them, some in battle and some in surrender, and behind the advancing wave came the terrible arithmetic of a war fought by true believers who did not fear death and did not doubt their cause. In time, the toll of it grew beyond any measure the mind can easily hold. Billions of lives ended across the scattered worlds, whole populations swept up or swept away in the name of a single desert prophet. Here lies the deep and bitter irony at the very heart of Paul Atreides, the thing that makes his story a tragedy even in the fullness of his triumph. He is the one person in all the worlds who saw this coming most clearly, who watched it unfold in his visions long before it began in truth, and who recoiled from it with all the horror a good soul can feel. He did not want the slaughter. He dreaded it more than he dreaded his own death. Through all his years in the desert, he searched the branching futures for some narrow path, some slender way through, that might let him have his survival and his people's freedom and the fall of his enemies without also unleashing this wave of blood across the stars. And in the end, he could not find it. The forces he had set in motion, the faith he had come to embody, the sheer momentum of a people risen up behind a Messiah, all of it swept past his ability to hold it back. For this is the strange and sorrowful truth of what he became. Paul is a reluctant God, a man carried to the summit of a movement he never fully wished to lead, riding a wave of devotion he set in motion and can no longer command. Once the faith took hold, it belonged less to him than to the millions who believed in him, and their belief had a will and a hunger of its own. A God may be worshipped, but a God who is worshipped by fanatics is also, in a strange way, imprisoned by them. For the faithful do not truly want their prophet to restrain them. They want him to lead them onward, and the more he might counsel mercy or restraint, the more his very words risk being reshaped by his followers into fresh reasons for the war. The banner that flies over the jihad carries his name, but the man beneath the name has become almost a captive of his own legend, able to see the horror with perfect clarity, and yet unable to lift the cause from the hands that carry it. He might raise his voice against the killing, and his followers would only hear in it some deeper wisdom, some hidden blessing upon their zeal. He might counsel patience, and they would find in his patience only a sign of how certain the final victory must be. Everything he does is turned by the great engine of their faith into fresh fuel for the very fire he longs to smother, and there is no gesture he can make that the believing multitude will not read as encouragement to go on. There is a lesson buried gently in this, one worth holding softly rather than sharply, and it is a lesson about the strange helplessness that can live inside even the greatest power. We tend to imagine that a person who can see the future and command whole worlds must surely be able to shape events to his liking. And yet, here is a man who could do both of those things and still found himself unable to stop the one outcome he most wished to prevent. Foresight showed him the flood, but foresight is not the same as the power to hold back the sea. Command gave him armies, but an army lit by holy fire is not a tool that stays obediently in the hand. He had become the most powerful being in the known universe, and he discovered that even such power has its limits, and that the greatest of those limits is often the momentum of the very devotion that raised him up. And so the conquest that began with a fallen house and a boy fleeing into the desert ends, at least for now, not in a simple bright triumph, but in something far more shadowed and complex, a victory shot through with grief. The name of Muad'Dib rings across the stars, spoken with awe on countless worlds, and behind that ringing name lies a trail of sorrow that its bearer would give a great deal to undo. The reluctant god sits upon his throne while his legend runs ahead of him into places he cannot follow and cannot recall, and he carries within him the terrible knowledge of exactly what his own name has cost the worlds. It is the loneliest kind of power, the power that can see everything and prevent almost nothing, and it settles over the whole of the empire like a long, slow dusk. Let all of that vast and sorrowful history grow soft and distant now, the far worlds and the marching legions and the countless lives fading gently into the dark, the way the noise of a distant storm fades as it moves away over the horizon and leaves the air clean and still behind it. You need carry none of its weight. It is only a tale told to be set down, and you are safe and warm and far from any of it. Let the great troubled figure upon his throne recede into the quiet, and let your own breathing grow slow and deep and easy, drawing you softly down, away from war and grief and grandeur alike, into the simple, gentle peace of sleep. And now we come to the gentle end of the telling, to the quiet place where all the sand settles and the question the whole story has been circling can be answered softly and set to rest. What happens next, after the throne is won and the great war rolls outward across the stars, is the story that the next chapter of this long tale will take up. The turning of the account from conquest towards something more inward and more subtle, from the winning of power toward the far harder task of living inside it. For the story of a fallen house and a boy who became a prophet is, in a sense, complete. The house has fallen and risen again. The boy has become an emperor. The desert people have inherited the galaxy. And yet the truest part of the tale is only now beginning, because the getting of power and the keeping of it are two very different things, and the second is by far the more dangerous. For a little while it may seem that a man who sits upon the highest throne of all the worlds, who can see the shape of things to come, and who holds the very lifeblood of the empire in his hand, must surely be safe from every threat. But the danger that now gathers around Paul Atreides is not the danger of open armies or invading fleets. It is a quieter thing, a slow and patient thing, woven in shadow by those who have learned that they cannot defeat him in the light. The great powers he humbled upon the sand have not forgotten their humbling, and behind their careful bows they have begun to draw together, not to fight him directly, for they know they cannot, but to lay a subtle snare, the kind of trap that closes not with a blow, but with a whisper, over long years, until the victim finds himself caught before he ever saw the net. Several of the old powers of the Empire lean their heads together in this quiet work. The Spacing Guild, which alone can carry ships between the stars and which resents the grip Paul now holds upon the spice their travel depends on, has its own reasons to wish him diminished. The ancient sisterhood, the Bene Gesserit, whose long breeding program shaped the very bloodlines that produced him, and who never intended for their creation to slip so entirely beyond their control, watch him with a mixture of awe and alarm and calculation. And with them comes another power, strange and unsettling, the Tleilaxu, a secretive folk who master the shaping and remaking of flesh itself, who can grow and mold living things to their purposes in ways that trouble the ordinary mind. These three, so different from one another and so accustomed to working alone, find in their shared unease a common cause, and they begin to move together against the one figure who overshadows them all. At the heart of the trap they weave lies the tenderest and most personal of all the threads we have followed, the question of an heir, and the two women who stand on either side of the new emperor's throne. There is Chani, the beloved of the desert, who holds Paul's heart and longs to give him a child of their love. And there is Irulan, the wife in name only, the princess of the fallen line, who holds the title of empress, but not the warmth of the marriage, and who nurses her own quiet hopes of one day mattering, of one day being the mother of the imperial line. The question of which of them will bear the future, of who will carry the blood that inherits the throne, becomes far more than a private matter of the heart. It becomes a fault line that the gathered conspirators mean to work at patiently, knowing that the deepest wounds are often struck not through a ruler's armies, but through the people he loves. And so the shape of what is to come grows slowly clear, a shape both grand and intimate at once. It is the story of a ruler who can see the future and yet feels it steadily closing in around him, who holds more power than anyone in history, and yet finds the walls of that power drawing nearer year by year. It is the story of a Messiah who must now live with everything his rise has made, the war he could not stop, the worship he did not want, the enemies who smile as they plot, and the love he cannot fully hold on to. The victory is behind him, and ahead lies the far stranger challenge of enduring it, of remaining himself amid the vast machinery of faith and empire that his own name set turning. That is the tale the next chapter will unfold, the story of what happens after the crown is won, and it is best met when it comes, gently and without fear. For it too will be told softly, in its own good time. But none of that belongs to tonight, and there is no need to reach toward it now. Tonight, there is only the settling and the letting go, the drawing back from all these great and distant things into the warm, small quiet of your own rest. So let us gather it all up one last time, lightly, the way you might gather a handful of sand and let it run slowly through your fingers. Remember the vast empire of the far future, the countless worlds turning around a single distant throne, held together by ancient powers and by the ban on thinking machines that left everything resting on trained human minds. Remember the desert planet and the precious spice found nowhere else, the dust that let the great ships cross the dark and made a barren world the center of everything. Remember the noble House Atreides and the beloved Duke, and the cruel House Harkonnen that hated them, and the quiet, fearful Emperor who laid the trap between them. Remember the terrible night of the fall, and the flight of Paul and his mother into the deep desert to die, and how the desert instead remade them. Remember the Fremen, the hardy blue-eyed people of the sand, and the sietch, and the stillsuit, and the giant worms, and how a fugitive boy learned their ways, and rode the great creature, and drank the deadly water, and rose again, transformed. Remember how he became Muad'Dib, the prophet the desert had long awaited, and gathered the tribes into an army that shook the empire, and how upon the sand at last the Sardaukar broke, and the emperor knelt, and the throne of all the worlds passed into the hands of the boy from Caladan. And remember, softly, the price of it, the love he could not keep, the marriage he made without love, and the holy war he foresaw with dread and could not hold back. Let all of it drift together now into one warm and faraway glow, the fall and the desert and the rising and the throne, no longer separate stories to be held apart, but a single slow tide moving across the dunes of memory in the dark. You do not need to keep a single piece of it. You never did. The names may fade like distant lights going out one by one across a great plain. The worlds and the titles and the strange hard words, all loosening their hold and slipping quietly away. There is nothing left to follow, and nothing left to solve. Only the soft, even rhythm of your own breath and the gentle weight of your own body sinking deeper into rest. So let your thoughts grow slow, and let the desert grow dark and still, the last light fading from the sky above the dunes, the sand cooling, the great worms sleeping far below, the whole vast story going quiet all around you. Let your breathing carry you down, slow and easy, past the throne and the war and the sorrow, past every name and every world, down into the deep soft quiet where the story cannot follow and only rest remains. There is nothing more you need to do tonight, nothing more to hold, nothing more to fear. Simply let go and drift, and sink gently down into the warm and welcome dark of sleep. And so we come, softly, to the end of our telling. Tonight we remembered the whole of the story so far, the long road across the sands of Dune, from a wide and ancient empire down to a single desert world, and from the fall of one noble house to the rise of a strange new emperor upon the sand. We began with the great shape of it all, an empire of countless worlds in the far future, held together by distant powers and by the band that left the fate of civilization in human minds alone. We learned of Arrakis, the desert planet, and of the spice found nowhere else, the precious dust that lets great ships cross the void and made a barren world the center of all the stars. We met the noble House Atreides and its beloved duke, and the cruel House Harkonnen that had hated them for generations. And we followed the quiet fear of an emperor who gave the Atreides a gift that was really a snare. We remembered the Bene Gesserit and their long, patient prophecy, and the young man Paul, troubled by dreams of a desert he had never seen. We followed the terrible night of the betrayal, the fall of Duke Leto, and the flight of Paul and his mother into the deep desert to die. And then we watched the desert change him. We met the Fremen, the hardy people of the sand, and followed Paul as he learned their ways, rode the great worm, and took the girl of his dreams as his love. We saw him drink the water of life and wake transformed, and become Muad'Dib, the prophet the desert had awaited. We followed the Fremen War, the breaking of the Harkonnens, the great final battle, and the moment a fugitive boy captured the emperor and seized the throne of the known universe. And we sat, at the last, with everything that victory cost him. We saw the brittle piece of the world he had won, the kneeling houses and the risen Fremen. We saw Chani, his true love, standing beside a man who had become a living god, and Irulan, the wife taken without love to hold a throne together. And we followed the holy war he had foreseen with dread and could not stop, spreading his name across the stars on a tide of faith he no longer commanded. We looked ahead, gently, to the story still to come, the quiet traps and gathering conspiracies that wait for a man who has won everything and must now learn to live inside it. There is nothing left now that you must remember. Let each of those far worlds and desert nights sink away from you, down through still, dark water, growing fainter and fainter until only calm remains. The battles have all gone quiet. The great questions have all been laid down for the night. You are safe, and you are whole, and nothing here asks anything of you. Let your breathing slow, and let the last of the day dissolve like mist over a still desert at dawn. Good night. If this story carried you gently toward rest, you are always welcome back. There are many more long, slow tales waiting here for you on the nights to come.